Hey, welcome back to the Game Dev Show. I'm here with my buddy Yorai, and we're gonna. Oh, he's over the other way. I hate pointing on YouTube, but anyway, we're here to talk about game dev, and today we're going to talk about some unique games and quite a few other topics. We were a little late starting because we're talking about all of the interesting things to talk about today. Also, if you have questions and you're here with us live, please just drop them in chat. I will pop them up on the screen like this, and then we'll talk about them as much as we can, try to answer them. And first, I just wanted to say hi, Yorai. You want to say hello to everybody?
Hi everyone. How are you doing, Jason?
I'm pretty good. It's been a nice, relaxing week, trying to get a lot of stuff done, trying to kind of catch up on the conference stuff and relax from the past conference, getting the mastermind groups some serious progress there. I ran into an issue with testing the web page for those. So anybody who's interested in the mastermind group stuff for game devs, they're just testing out some web page stuff. It all worked fine in development, and then as soon as we put it out to production, of course, run into some issues. So we're going to be dealing with that. But overall, yeah, everything's been good. I've been doing lots of videos all week, trying to do one at least every other day, and that's been a success. So I've been, I'd say, having a relatively good week. How about yourself?
I've been doing pretty well. Played a ton of Rune Factory 5, and then Ludum Dare started, so I decided to try and approach making something for it. Eventually, I did more talking than I did coding, but I had a lot of fun.
Nice, nice. You gonna tell everybody what about that theme real quick because it sounded kind of interesting.
Yeah, so the Ludum Dare theme for Ludum Dare 50, which is ongoing since Saturday and ending on Tuesday, is Delay the Inevitable. The official post explicitly had expect delays as a banner. And there are many ways in which you can delay an inevitable thing. Of course, some initial approaches are things like a Flappy Bird that gets heavier over time. So you have to stress manage how fast you click, or else you'll sink, which is eventually going to happen no matter what you do, because you're going to either tire out or the difficulty is going to get too high that you can't click fast enough. But there are other approaches to it. For example, you're not the one who has to delay the inevitable. It could be the AI against you. You are inevitable, like Thanos, or
They're trying to delay
or
you.
yeah, or you can delay something inevitable, but not on the axis of time, but rather as you play turns. So maybe something bad eventually has to happen, and you control it with turn economy, which is a big topic of card games. It's just a very fun topic to discuss in general.
Yeah, I think it's a neat one. It's one of those like I can actually come up with ideas for too. I think most of the time I struggle to come up with things, but this it kind of clicks and makes sense to me. So there were a bunch of questions that have already popped up, and I don't know if maybe we should take some of those early on. It seems like probably a good idea, but I didn't know if there's anything big that you want to just mention or talk about or get out of the way first before we dive into that kind of stuff.
Nothing pops into mind now.
All right, well, perfect.
Unless you want to discuss the big R place, which has
Let's
no
save
elephant
that
in
for
the
a little
room, but
while. I think
yeah.
let's talk about what's going on Reddit and these crazy weird games. Maybe halfway through, jump over to that. I think it would be an interesting discussion. Um, before I take any actual questions, though, I did want to say special thanks to Daniel C, who just became a channel subscriber and dropped in a super chat of a dancing dog that I wish Restream would show. Like it's got the goofy little emojis and stuff, but Restream doesn't show them. So I'd pop it up otherwise. All right, let's take this first question. So in the chat before we started actually the show, which is why you should join early, talking a little bit about writer flow and how I ran into an issue with it personally and I wasn't able to reproduce it. And I was just curious if anybody else had any problems yet. And somebody had asked what the problem was. What was the issue that you ran into with writer flow? Please be sure to share with us. I'm starting to import it into live projects. So the one problem that I came across, and again, I couldn't reproduce this more than the one time, was with the sections. So with sections, it creates these little folders, which is essentially an empty game object that colors it. And what happened was when I was loading multiple scenes asynchronously, or not, I guess it wasn't asynchronously, synchronously through a menu item, they disappeared randomly, and everything lost its parent. The parents just disappeared. It only happened once. I couldn't get it to happen again, so I don't know if it's an issue with something else that happened in my project or with writer flow. All of the other things, the little shortcuts and all that, haven't had any problems at all. It was just this one thing that was modifying the hierarchy, and it's very likely that it was some conflict with my code, but I don't know for sure. So that's where I'd watch out though. And again, if anybody has any other issues that you ran into with it, let me know. I'm kind of curious. All right, so let's see. I think we could probably jump into some of the bigger questions or some of the other statements here first. James, shout out to JetBrains who gave away it looks like free and discount subs to their stuff for people in Ukraine and evacuee game devs, which is awesome. Ryder and JetBrains in general has been an awesome company though. Also, we'll be giving away a JetBrains Ryder license later. So oh, cool. They're very very cool. I love their tools. And then here's a question about building. Is there a way to exclude files from a build and not by marking the assembly definition as editor? So is there a way to pull something so that it doesn't get put into a build in Unity, which is kind of the opposite of go ahead. Why don't you take this one?
So the easiest way, without putting the assembly definition checkbox, is to actually use the ifdef. Um, you use the hashtag if editor, a Unity editor, and then you wrap the code inside it, and that's going to die out when the code actually compiles, regardless of if it's needs a separate assembly definition or not. It's the solution I often opt to because I don't make too many editor scripts, and I hate having two separate assembly definitions to manage. So that's an easy one. If you're talking about files in general and not just code, even though I assume you're talking about code from the assembly definition mentioned, you can actually make special folders in Unity that are ignored by the Unity project as a whole. Any folder that starts with the squiggly mark will straight up be ignored entirely, as far as I
Oh,
recall.
really? The one next to one, right?
Yeah.
So if you start it with
Um,
that, it gets. I did not know that. That's a new one for me.
Yeah, there's a whole special folder names Unity manual page that's really worth looking into with it.
Let's
Put
pull
it in
that up
the
and see if I can get a
yeah.
page up and showing properly formatted,
It was
right?
yeah, it was apparently folders that end with the squiggly mark, not the start. I was confused. But if you scroll down to the bottom, there are hidden assets, and of course, everything in here is worth reading, really. Um,
See
yeah,
hidden assets. Okay.
so all of these will be straight up not included in the project nor build, which it has its uses if you're just doing version control and you want the artist to have as many files as they want without impacting the Unity project. You can just have the source material squiggly mark or dot source material folder and then drop everything in there. It's going to be on your version control. It's not going to be on your Git, on the Unity build. Sorry.
So it won't show up like in your project, and I guess that explains why. Yeah, a lot. I've seen that a lot, and I never noticed the dot was there for that reason. Interesting. Well, that's super handy. I'm glad you asked that question because I didn't know that. All right, let's see. Here's another question, semi-related about files, at least, and in source control. So, how do you manage Git in Unity, dude? Or how do you manage Git in Unity? So, I've used Git in Unity quite a bit lately. I've been using Plastic because it's Unity's new big thing, and I want to get familiar with it. I've used Git plenty. I know how to use that. I want to get familiar with and really kind of drill down into their new tool. But for people who want to get started using Git or trying to use it, what's the way that you recommend? Do you use like an editor tool? Do you use an external tool? What do you do?
Um, So I work with others who are not as used to Unity as me, and Plastic, as much as I like it, I am still a Git fanatic at heart.
Right.
So I use Git Kraken these days. with Relogic, we have licenses for everyone. And what we do is we have a Unity git ignore file, which essentially tracks all the file types that Unity wants and ignores the ones that we need to ignore, folders that are not necessarily relevant to the builds, like the lib folder and the other one. I keep forgetting the name of my top of my head. But there's a public Unity git ignore file recommended on GitHub itself that you can start with and include anything else you want. In general, the git ignore file lets you do most of the work in terms of what files to actually include. And if you're familiar with Git, that solves all of your problems except large files, which is what Git LFS is for if you are using Git.
Right, so here's the git ignore I just shared, and that's got the folders you're talking about, like the build, temp, and library, and all that stuff. Oh, obj, it's the one I always forget about. And then git LFS. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that that's an important part. Because a lot of people, I think, set up Git, they check in a bunch of things, their repo blows up, and then they're like, "Oh, Git's terrible," because they don't realize there's this extra step that you have to use only if you're a game developer, really. You don't generally have to deal with this if you're a web dev or any other kind of developer.
Yeah, so Git LFS, large file storage, is basically when you use Git, the default implementation is that you track changes in the binary of the file. And as you do track these changes, you can show what's going on. Generally, the files are small, so there isn't a lot to track. Therefore, you can store a copy of every single state of the object throughout its lifetime and do differences between those. But with large assets such as 4K textures or big models or animation files, you don't get the privilege of doing that because it's all junk. It's not text with actual portions that you cut out. If you change a single pixel, the entire compression might change the entire texture, and you essentially lose the ability to have multiple versions of the object without consuming a ton of space.
So that
Large files,
difference is the reason though, right? It's because you can't
yeah,
just store the text delta. You have to store essentially a whole new copy of that binary file of that texture. So instead of like I changed 3 lines of source code and we changed like a couple hundred bytes or whatever, a couple K, you're changing like a couple megabytes or 20 megs or 100 megs or your 4K texture. Who knows?
yeah. So basically, when that happens and you lose the benefit of using Git as it were meant to exist, you waste a lot of storage, which isn't free because you have to manage all these versions somewhere. So GitLFS was invented, and it's a solution that instead just has one version of the file, as far as I recall, but it is able to still synchronize everything across the users of the project, which is what you need in the end of the day. Um, so yeah,
Yeah, so you just have to set up Git LFS additionally, right? And do that when you're setting up your Git repo. Okay. Well, that's
I, I just want I just want to mention that even though it's extremely relevant, I never actually had the experience of needing to use it because all the projects I work on are pixel art.
fair enough. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true. I would say don't worry too much about Git LFS until you're at the point where you're actually checking in and changing things. If you're just doing like a little test project, trying to get familiar with Git, get familiar with it first before you try to add in the complexity of LFS too. So it's not that complex, but it does add an extra layer of stuff. And then there was a question here that said, "Plastic is Unity's new big thing." Oh no! Um, when I said new big thing, I meant their new source control setup that I think is supposed to replace Collaborate. So I want to make sure that I'm familiar with the built-in default thing. Not the new big thing. They're doing lots of other big things, but it is their new source control thing. So here was a
yeah.
question about protection. Is there a way to protect my artwork and stuff from being decompiled in their executable?
Uh,
Why? I guess there are two things here. There are some ways that you can make it a little bit harder, but you probably don't need to. You're probably wasting your time on something that is not worth the energy most of the time. I don't know how you feel about that, Uri, but
Yeah, so I generally say that it's not worth it, and the people who are asking this are already on the path to lose because there's so much stuff to learn just to do basic obfuscation of your stuff while still getting to load them into a level. Um, Generally speaking, Unity serializes all the files so that it can load them fast for the game. It doesn't care about hiding what your users might want to extract out of your game. It cares about you loading your content fast. Essentially, that means that people can make tools that load the content fast and then just extract it to wherever they want to. If you want to protect your files from being accessible by these common tools, you change how you load your stuff. Not from the Unity code side. Essentially, you have to change the actual build and how Unity loads files, which generally means needing Unity source access or specialized assets on the store that can compress the files you load before you build them, then include them in the build, and then at build time decompress them and do whatever you want with them. But that means you also have to protect that code. And generally speaking, it's way harder to obfuscate something versus how long it takes to uh, reverse engineer the process and just get the stuff out. The big games, specifically things like MiHoYo and Square Enix and all that, try to change the actual Unity files. So even if you get a proper looking file, it has new data in it, and then you have to figure out how to actually read that new data. Or they use proprietary formats that they invented themselves. So you have to make a tool specialized for them. It's a lot of work just so you can protect your stuff. And in the end of the day, even if it's loaded into the game, people can just look at it and just screenshot something or replicate portions of it if they really care. There are also some generalized tools that just look at the memory in your computer and try to extract things from there, regardless of the game. That's something that's been used in some character creator popular games on Steam. People make their OCs and then just extract the mesh data at runtime. It's a bit hacky, but it works.
So
Yeah,
there was another question. I want to talk a little bit about obfuscation, but there was a question about is it worth obfuscating code further if you're using IL to CPP? And I would assume so. Like, I think that I mean
yeah,
the easy obfuscation, and for people who don't know and haven't used it before, there are lots of tools, including I think asset store packs that will just go in there, and when you build, all it really does is like rename. I mean, the core thing that it's doing is renaming all of your methods and your variables and things so that they're no longer obvious. It's no longer a set health or add health or take damage. It's now a 17A52 whatever, so that everything is non-human readable, so that when they decompile the source code, because it's IL with the intermediate language that you get from C sharp, when they decompile that, it gives them back less human readable stuff. It's I mean it's still code, but it's not easy to read and understand, and that's what it's doing essentially. So there's value in doing that, but that's like an automated process that you just pop in there. There's a huge downside though if you're early on in development and you're trying to test and debug it. It makes it a whole lot harder to figure out what's going on in your game, what the actual problem is. So
yeah.
you got to remember to think about that too. And I wouldn't worry too much about protecting your game unless you've got like some sort of online game where you want to really minimize the risk of people cheating and kind of doesn't stop them from cheating, but it slows them down a little bit if you obfuscate stuff.
Yeah. So generally speaking, if you obfuscate things, it's only going to make the process of trying to get the actual code slower. If people are trying to cheat, they'll likely do memory cheating first, and that doesn't care about how your members are named or all of that, which is the information that's easy to get when you're using .NET related code. Um, well, not .NET, just intermediate language. When you're using IL to CPP, another thing happens that you essentially lose the ability to directly connect to the code you originally wrote because it changes pretty heavily. But there are IL to CPP decompilers these days that do a pretty good job at looking at your code. So it is worth obfuscating if you care about obfuscating that much. really doesn't do you too well these days. People who want to cheat always get around all that. That's the real problem. All the work hours you spend on trying to make this work and easy to work with means that the 10 hackers who try to care about your game at any one point will just have to do 1/100th of a work and get the stuff out.
They just have to work a little harder, huh?
Yeah, they only care about the one bit that they care about. They don't try to get your entire code usually.
Yeah.
Also, to the person asking about encryption being slow, not all approaches are slow. There are very, very fast approaches to some obfuscation of files or encryptions, specifically using a byte XOR over your entire source file, and then at runtime just doing a single pass on the byte array is generally extremely fast, like linear time size of the file. And that tends to hide a lot of things until people get the XOR key, the one byte value that you use. And that's actually something that's being done in quite a bit of the bigger games. I think games from Square Enix, Punishing Gray Raven, and some other big ones have that in their technology. Um, Generally speaking, I only know these things because I'm in reverse engineering forums out of curiosity, and I'm seeing how the big tech is being handled these days in games. But yeah, it tends to be a really fast process, and it gives the users a lot of trial and error trying to figure out. That said, if you are using only a simple XOR key, it's not going to usually be enough because Unity has a way of doing its file structure like asset bundles have Unity FS, if I recall, at the start of the file. So if you see 7 bytes that are always the same in every start of an asset bundle looking file, and they're not saying Unity FS, you just have to keep trying on those little set of bytes until it finally says Unity FS, and you know you get the key.
Okay.
uh,
Yeah, as yeah, I would say don't worry too much about obfuscating though, unless you're at that point. I just saw a question that it got blocked. They were asking what your headphones are. The way they asked it got the question blocked by YouTube chat.
my headphones are really, really, really old and just really attached to neckband on ear headphones. So
Oh, okay. They're
I'm
they go around the back instead of over the head.
yeah,
I've had some like that
yeah.
before. Oh,
I
you
can't
gotta, I was
find any good
pull some
ones
from
anymore.
Jason Story's shelf down.
I can't find any good ones, and there's not a good place in Israel that I can just go to and try headphones conveniently, especially since the Corona happened. So I essentially bought 10 copies of these, and I'm just keeping them in a storage. I think I'm down to my last 2. So when they run out, I'm going to have a crisis.
Oh man, I have to go try something new. I always have to try on headphones personally too. I have to actually put them on, feel them, hold them on my head for a little while, and make sure that they're not giving me a headache because it's
On that
they're
note,
just fun.
do you keep backup hardware for when your stuff breaks accidentally?
Somewhat, yeah. So what I usually do is I keep all of the when I upgrade stuff, I usually have the old version. Like I have my old almost working computer over there. Something's wrong with it. I don't know what, but I know I can cannibalize it for parts. I got all my old yeah, I always have at least one old version. We got like a stack
Yeah.
of keyboards and my yeah, yeah. Yeah, I shouldn't
I
talk about this. I got a
yeah,
problem.
it's not a problem. I also keep the 2 past computers that I have and 1 laptop just in case. And on top of that, I have 2 backup keyboards, and I used to use a really cheap mouse, so I ended up just buying a box of 6 of them because I liked how it felt and it was really light. And I just put them on the side. And whenever something goes wrong, if it starts double clicking or drifting or has a problem with the scrolling, I just yank it out, throw it out, and I plug in the
Just
new
grab
one.
the next one. That's hilarious. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
got stacks of keyboard. Yeah, I'll have to one day I'll do a little tour of my hoard, which is bad. Like my wife always calls me a technology hoarder, and I try to deny it, but she's not wrong. So anyway, if anybody else has like, if you guys keep your old stuff around, I'm curious. Drop it in chat and let me know. We got a bunch of questions real quick. I'm gonna jump through while I let people tell us if they're keeping their stuff. Will your Game Dev Guild conference be uploaded after the event ends? and you should consider asking Writer to sponsor the event. Yes, it will be uploaded after, including the Q and A's, and I agree. I think Writer agreed, or JetBrains so far had agreed to give away some copies in like a raffle type setup. But I think maybe they'd be a great sponsor too. I totally agree. And then another question: what's a good price range to hire a freelance developer? This varies drastically based on where that freelance developer is and how experienced they are. If the freelance developer is super experienced and in the
Also, what you
US
need.
or Europe or somewhere, it's going to be very expensive. Um, yeah. So let's just talk about some, I guess, price ranges. So say you were hiring somebody to do some contract game dev work, right? Like building something
Yeah.
out. Or you maybe just go off of rates that you know other people have charged. What do you think is like a fair price for a mid-range, maybe not like super junior, somebody that can get in and be somewhat productive in the first month or by the end of the first month? Um, what do you think is a good hourly range in, I guess, dollars or like, yeah, I
So
suppose
generally
just
speaking,
dollars. I
I
don't know.
I like the people who I work with to be happy. So what I tend to do is try to figure out where they are from, Google the average developer income there, and try to bump it up by at least 10% over the average for the place. Uh, Generally, freelancers, depending on the project, might even want more than that because they don't get the long-term job security, as it were. So they try to make
Right.
sure that the downtimes count in between.
Or in the
Um,
US, they're not getting the healthcare and all of the
yeah,
benefits and bonuses, right?
yeah, that depends on the place a lot. So they might ask for a higher range. Um, it's really difficult to tell. The biggest factor usually is what you actually need, not specifically the skill level of the developer, but of your project. Because if you know you're asking for something really simple, you still wouldn't want to, like, just because the person knows a lot more, if they have to write the same lines of code that somebody that knows half as much as them can write, even if it takes a tiny bit longer, they might end up cheaper than the high experience one. So it tends to be depending on the actual difficulty level of the project.
The high experience one may end up over engineering your simple problem too, right? Like you may end up
Yeah,
going to them with, I need
that's
this
more of a
little thing,
communication
and
thing,
it comes
though.
into it turns into like a big like, well, here's how we'll fix the whole thing. You got to watch out for that when, I guess, when you're hiring. But
Yeah, generally speaking, when you try to get work with someone, that someone is going to try to get more work because that's how they get paid. Um, so try to figure out what you actually need and not what they're trying to tell you that you need. You know what you need more than what they're trying to pitch usually.
right.
Um, that said, do respect them if you're trying to work with them. Obviously, if you're not going to take their input and they're trying to help you because you're going to pay them, that generally means there's a miscommunication going on.
Now, let's just talk real quick on some loose numbers. So, what I would expect in like, I guess, this area for new developers, junior developers at the very, very, very low end, you're probably looking at maybe like around $25 an hour. Like the super, super, that would be like my expectation here. Maybe that's assuming that they're still able to do stuff. Higher up, maybe around like 40, and then peaking out around 150 at the expert level. It goes higher, of course, but I definitely know plenty of expert level developers in the U.S. that charge 150 and more, and could raise their rates if they wanted to. Um, so that's kind of like the very loose range. I don't know. I know obviously that varies from country to country and even region to region. I'm in one of the more expensive parts of the world in Southern California, so prices are high here. What about like what have you seen like just some random like rates that you've seen other people charge or ask for around friends or people that you've seen talk to?
So generally speaking, Israel has pretty good public communication about these kinds of numbers. I don't
Oh,
look at them a lot because I generally don't need it, and I'm the kind of person who's trying to do all the work myself, which is not necessarily the healthiest uh, habit, except getting to know a lot. But generally speaking, a developer doing system development and that kind of stuff can get 20 to 30,000 shekels, which is a bit less than $10,000 a month.
Oh, okay.
If they're doing full time, but you can extrapolate based on that how much you actually be willing to pay for a project that needs a system. Um, Again, it's mostly looking at the average rate that a person would get full time, figuring out how many hours you're going to need out of the person, bump it up a bit because they probably have downtimes and they're going to be accounting for it, and you want the person you're working with to be happy to work for you. And yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. So there are two things in here. One, somebody mentioned in chat what they've been charging for freelance development, $50 an hour. If anybody else has a number in there that they either are charging or have seen somebody else or know somebody's charging, I'd love to see them kind of in chat, just get an idea, and see where everybody's at. Maybe there's a big range here. Maybe everybody's at $50. It seems like from the chat, there's definitely a little bit of variance. And then the other thing, I was gonna say, a lot of the time, what I recommend and prefer to do, especially starting out with hiring developers, is just hire them. Kind of, I think you were somewhat alluding to this, on a per project basis to get like a job done. So I'll come up with a price to get a specific feature or tool or app or whatever thing done, and then do it around that. So then, if they're faster, cool, that works out. Then I know they work faster and you can pay them more per hour. If they're slower, then they end up getting paid less per hour. I just want to make sure that the job gets done, and then they can go as fast or slow as they need to get it done. That's my preferred way usually, but that's because I also hate managing people. So right.
Yeah, I mean, a
Not,
big part of it is that you're trying to hire someone to do work for you, not to give you more work to do by managing them. Because you essentially become a manager if you're trying to hire too many people who need too many hands-on
yeah.
approach, which is why early communication is really, really important.
So there was this other question about Asmongold's Gaming Expo. I saw this pop up too. So he's going to be pronouncing 30 different games that are in development and putting up 50,000 in prizes. Wanted to know if they could share the link. Definitely drop the link in chat. I was going to check that out too. It looked really cool. Um, I mean, I don't watch a lot of gaming, to be honest. Like I don't really watch people play games that much because I just when I start to, I want to start coding them instead. So like I'm like, oh, let's get back over to coding it. But I think this is very interesting and very cool, especially helping out new developers. Did you see this, by the way? Okay. It
Nope.
popped up on my YouTube, so I saw the announcement from it. All right, here's a question I think that is perfect for your eye. It's about 2D and attacks. If you're trying to do a 2D attack or an attack in a 2D RPG, would you use an attack point and move it per direction? I'm using it with an overlap spear, but there seems to be a simpler way. So if you're doing a 2D RPG, how do you deal with attacking in different directions or your attacks? Like, well, I'm sure there are like a million different ways, but
Yeah.
what would be like your default way, I guess? Like what's the way that you would default to if you're building out a 2D RPG and you want to do an attack?
Well, generally speaking, with XNA, I kind of have to manually write down everything where I want it to hit because there isn't a game engine with visible colliders and all that. I actually have to figure out the precise pixels of where I want to do it. Usually, that would involve knowing the offset from where you want the character to be to where the attack is, and then using some transform metrics to flip it around based on the direction, gravity direction, etc., etc. If you try to figure out the characters going on the walls or and going upside down and so on and so forth. With Unity, there's probably the simplest way is going to be putting the collider under the character, and then if the character shrinks or grows, or you flip it on the x-axis with the scale to turn it around, then the hitbox will move with it, which is
Oh,
really convenient. And that way, the overlap sphere, because it's going to be a general collider in the scene, it's going to scale with the size of the character. So you can make the character larger and your hitbox will grow, which is not something you're going to get if you're calling it in raw code and you're not accounting for it. Generally speaking, if you're doing non-uniform scale as well, like say a fat character or a tall character, then overlap sphere is not going to get you any of that, but a collider will. And
Nice.
colliders are visible in editor, so
So it seems like what they're using is pretty close at least. It's a
yeah,
that's a
I
very
mean
good
it's
point on the scaling too.
so overlap sphere is good because you're not asking all the time, hey, do I have whatever collisions in here? But you can also enable and disable colliders on the fly, and it's actually something that Unity itself recommends in one of the tutorials. And Brackis has something about it too, where as part of the animation, you will enable and disable hitboxes on the weapon. It lets you visibly see at edit time where you're going to hit, which is really, really convenient. Um, Unless you're trying to do something dynamic with code, in which case you're going to figure out how you want to handle both the easy authoring and the ability to change things around. For example, in Terraria, we have items that will increase the size of your melee weapons by a small percent, so you end up having a bigger hitbox for the weapon. But we also position the hitbox manually, so because we know the bit size is bigger, we can adjust things around. But if you're doing it as part of a Unity animation track and you're setting the sizes there, you're not going to be able to do that dynamically, at least, because Unity Animator is going to keep fighting you. So you have to keep every time letting the Unity Animator do its thing, and then you do the scaling. It's not as clean cut as raw code, in which case overlap sphere will win, because you can just say overlap sphere with X scale.
So there were a couple people that chimed in on the pay. I figured I'd just pop them up real quick and then we'll go on to the next one. It said I'm hired as a full-time long-term project as a technical artist at 35 an hour. Seems like a good rate. And then another one started at 40 an hour, currently get rates of 90 to 120 depending on the job and the company. That's definitely awesome. And
Yeah,
then
that's fantastic.
yeah. I used to do 35 doing web stuff, now charge 40 to 45 for Unity stuff. Also do lump sums and prefer it, but generally around 40. Yeah. So that's I prefer the lump sum ones too. And those ranges all seem totally normal for me. So that looks good. Let's see. There was a question about ECS, and I guess maybe this would be a better one for next week. But it says, should I worry about ECS and dot stuff that looks complex, or should I just develop normally? If you're asking that question, I would say don't worry about dots and ECS stuff. Just develop normally. Worry about dots and ECS stuff when you get to the point that you cannot do the things in components because they're just not possible. The thing that you want to do isn't possible, or it's just not really a realistic option. Like you're going crazy on the scale that you're not at that point yet. If you're not past the if you haven't hit that point yet, there's no need. I don't have any projects personally that need dots. I put it that way. I've worked on a lot of things. I don't have anything yet that needs that scale. There are some people that do, but I don't. And most people learning don't.
Generally speaking, unless your project includes gigantic swarms of whatever, you're not going to need ECS, and ECS is still experimental. The rest of the dot package, burst, jobs, perfectly fine to use, but they're more advanced code. If it looks complex to you right now, don't worry about it. Generally speaking, most games are way simpler than that, and as computers get better, you need dots less and less for the average game because the barrier of what counts as stressful goes up.
Yeah. I agree. Keep it simple to build your game. So here's another question on the contracting and stuff. If you have to learn something while developing the thing, do you charge for your time to learn or only count time while you type code? I think those are not exactly exclusive like binary. There's some
Yeah.
other options in between.
Generally speaking, you would charge the time that you need to figure out something, but it's good if you're saying in the communication that you don't actually know part of X, but you can figure it out. Try to be positive about these kinds of things because telling someone, hey, no, I don't know what I'm doing, there is no way I can do this, that's not going to be very enticing for people to hire you. But if you can figure it out, if you're confident that you can just Google it, figure something out in the 2 minutes, 2 hours of development, just be honest about it.
Yeah, just
Jason's
say,
story
"Oh, we're
explicitly
gonna figure out how to
mentioned,
get this done." Take a little
yeah,
while to get it right and get it figured out. But yeah, I would expect that people are still charging a bit while they're learning. I mean, if all you're doing is learning and you're not doing anything productive at all, like it's 8 hours and you haven't gotten anything done, I would I wouldn't feel comfortable charging for that. But if I'm not making any progress, but yeah, I would expect that you're learning while you're working on stuff. I mean, everybody learns on the job and gets better. That's how you become an experienced programmer, is by learning stuff while you're working. So I would definitely expect that. And the second part of this question, do you only count the time you type code? I just wanted to call it out because the typing part is like not necessarily the most important part. It's the thinking part that matters, right?
Yeah.
Figuring
Generally
out.
speaking, developers will spend more than 60% of their times reading code instead of writing code, which is why writing code that is easy to read is really, really important and why we advocate for it a lot. um, yeah.
Here's another question. Please share some tips, architectural ways to implement a civilization style, six style tech system. Unlocks which either boost stats, unlock new buildings, etc. So, do you want to
Uh,
take this or?
yeah, sure. I do want to say, though, the name of the question asker is showing the wrong one.
Oh,
That was from Adam Ksukas. So,
oh
yeah.
yeah, it's showing up wrong in Restream. Restream grabbed the. It got confused. Apparently, it's got the wrong names.
Yeah. So, regarding how to implement these kinds of things, first off, civilization is pretty modable, so you can actually go in, see how they make the stuff, how they store all the authored content, to figure out how you actually want to implement something similar. Now, generally speaking, um, science and technology systems are counters until you get a thing that doesn't necessarily do anything, but it just holds what it will actually give you once you have it.
Mhm.
And you're just making uh, that thing require other things before it to be available. It's mostly UI work and as in Unity context, scriptable objects to just point to other scriptable objects as necessities before they can be obtained. And you just
Is
hold a
that how you would
collection.
set it up? Like each unlock as maybe a scriptable object that has a
Yeah.
prerequisite or a list of prerequisite other scriptable object tech tree entries or something. So then they just kind of link back and then make an editor and a view for that.
Yeah, so generally speaking, you can make this scriptable object just point to the other things that it needs and hold other scriptable objects for the benefits it gives. If it's not something directly instanced, for example, you can say have a list of things it unlocks, stats it gives, and so on and so forth.
So
But
that
the
would be
actual
like
data structure,
on each like tech tree item, right? So you have like
yeah,
your whatever farming tech tree item, and then that has some list of stats, a list of buildings or units, and maybe multiple lists of things that it unlocks, right?
yeah, and generally speaking, the same structure can be applied to every part of that system. So if you have the individual items, you also have groups of items. For example, if you unlock theology and that has 3 items in it, and theology needs a part of the tree to have anything in it or all the things in it, you can just point to the scriptable object and ask, hey, does the player have anything in this group, or does the player have everything in this group, so I can start being unlocked? And the rest is really just UI work. You decide on the conditions of what actually needs to be available, and you make it show nicely depending on the state that you got.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds like a perfect answer. So let's see. We've got another question here. Let's take this one real quick. How do I know whether I'm junior or mid level? What are the metrics? It's just your title, right? It's whatever it says on your business card. That's how you know.
So, generally speaking, mid-level would be when you are pretty comfortable at doing the simple 10 to 15 minute kind of tasks where somebody asks you, hey, replicate that thing Bracky's made, and you can actually say, yeah, I did that in 10, 15 minutes, or 1 hour at the worst. If you take longer than that, you don't know, for example, how to play an audio in Unity or how to add post processing in Unity, you're still in the junior level. But once you are comfortable setting up something that in 1 hour you can press play and it actually feels like a tiny game, I think you're already at mid level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's about
And
right. Being able to get things done kind of on your own without needing any hand
The
holding.
most of the game development process can be applied with really simple things that you learn at the junior level, just stacked on top of each other. The juniors generally don't understand that, and they will try to go through long montages, uh, trying to figure out how to do something, learning 1,000 ways, but not getting anything done in that 1 hour. um, this is how you know if you're already able to get something done versus you're going to have to start researching and going through a rabbit hole to get something done.
Yeah.
Um, that said, if you want to be proper mid level, you also need to be confident about how fast you can look things up to implement them practically. Everybody might love to learn, but how fast you can learn the thing that you actually need to apply counts. So if you have to get a task, for example, there's a release happening in a week and things have to happen, mid-level developers would be able to just figure out what needs to happen, implement it in, and just go on and not stress about trying to figure out what's the best way to do it and starting to research it on and not have enough time and potentially do the unhealthy thing called crunching. Just be aware of that.
Here's a question on contacting people. I'll take this one. It says, "What's your take on reaching people with a completely free game slash app? I can barely reach YouTubers, and some ask for money to include the app in their video." Yes, it is not easy to, unless your game is actually fun or interesting to the person or you know them, it's going to be difficult to get them to take a look at it. I don't know how many different random emails I get a week with games that I would probably never play or apps and things that I wouldn't use. But a lot of the time, it's because I just get they get spammed out. It's like you can tell it's a copy paste spam that probably went to 100,000 YouTubers hoping that somebody would say yes. I don't know how you can really get a hold of people and get them to try it other than like being kind of active in the community and being publicly out there in advance. I think one of the things to talk about a lot is just getting your game out in front of people while you're building it as early on in the process and in front of people getting feedback and things. I don't know a good way to. I'm terrible at. I have a YouTube channel. I'm terrible at reaching out to YouTubers to get a hold of them to do anything. So I don't know. You got any thoughts, Yara?
So generally, visibility in the gaming space is a huge problem because there's a major saturation. So why do people need to bother looking at game A or game B? Is usually a big part. And as you said, going into the communities and showing your thing yesterday, what's called, is really beneficial because people can't care about something they don't know about. The more they get exposed to it, the more they might start thinking about it and then may take interest in finally trying it out when it becomes available, as it were. The games that show up on Unity subreddit or the R Games indie area every Sunday, day. Those tend to have a far more visibility than the other things I see. If you look at Steam metrics and the likes, when they eventually become available. YouTubers are content creators. They're going to try and find content for the audience they already have, not the audience they don't. So, unless you're finding a really small YouTuber, you're going to have to look for YouTubers who already play something very similar to what you do. And they might, if they're already big, they might actually want money for it because they're taking the risk of showing something that doesn't interest their audience, and some might
And everybody
unsubscribe.
else is offering them money for it, right? So,
Yeah.
like, everybody else is offering them some amount of cash to fill that slot, which makes it hard to do it on the free one, I assume.
Yeah, so it's generally a struggle of trying to ask. You lose nothing by asking, but if you are concerned, then try to reach out to more. Try to find the smaller ones that are focused on similar products to what you are making. Um, yeah, and show it on everywhere and everywhere that you can confidently do it. Don't turn advertising your thing into a second job.
So, here's another question about getting jobs. Do you think working prototypes can be substituted for prior work experience in job listings in your portfolio? Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's kind of the goal of it, because prior job experience, negates the need to have. I mean, having a prototype or something or some portfolio piece is good, but if you've got working job experience at a game company on games, you don't necessarily need that. I think that's exactly what it's a perfect substitute for. It's to get you past you know, that little hump. There's the people who've got nothing to show, people who've got some stuff to show, people who've got actual real world working experience, and you want to get from the nothing to the something to show with that portfolio piece and the prototypes.
Also, just showing that you made a prototype work is already proof of experience in being able to get stuff done. And on top of that, there are specialized teams that will do prototyping work as their thing. Somebody saying, "Yeah, we want to start a project. We're not exactly sure about it. Can you prototype X for us?" That's an actual job. People get paid to do it. Unity has a specialized video about 10 steps to prototyping well from a dedicated prototyping team. The entire thing they do is just prototyping stuff for others. So it's a real job. Yeah, it's good job listing in general. It's not a substitute, it is part of what it is there.
All right. So, any recommended Discord groups to post Unity questions? And then there was another question. I'm struggling for 3 days with the problem on this Unity question. Any recommended Discord chats? So I'm just gonna drop an invite link into my Discord chat. I would also jump into Jason's stories if you have a link to that. I think you need to go through his Kofi page though. That's linked down below. You'll probably find lots of good info there too. So check that out. But I just dropped it into chat. So anybody who really wants to jump in there, now is an opportunity to get in. Oh, hey, there's Jason's story right now. Jason's story. I
Hey,
was just talking
Did
about
somebody
it.
say? Did somebody say Jason? Yeah, I thought I'd
I
drop in.
did.
So.
I was just telling everybody to go check out your Kofi page and get into your Discord.
Yeah, what he said.
finally you're back.
All right, so that's the magic where you say Kofi and Jason appears out of the bottle like a genie. No, kidding. So if you're
Great.
hired as a programmer, this question popped up. I probably should just say hi to Jason for a second, but I want to ask it because I already hit the button. Do you often find yourself looking for already written code on Stack Overflow, YouTube, and Unity forums, or do you figure out and implement most things on yourself? So if you're hired as a programmer, I think we should take this as the when you're first starting out hired as a programmer to now, because it's probably a little bit different. What do you guys think? When you're hired, do you find that you're like on your first job, were you constantly looking, searching, and trying to find answers for things, copying code?
Generally, yeah, so generally speaking, you're never going to stop looking at Stack Overflow. Problems are going to show up, problems you've never faced before, and essentially, you're going to look for a solution that gets stuff done that's going to be one of the first things that shows up. So there is no reason you'll stop using it. If you know a solution, obviously you can already implement it yourself, saves you time. But the point is to get stuff done, solving problems. Um, Also, just to go back to the PSD single bones from Drawer Friedman, I think the official package on the 2D PSD importer lets you do the bone binding yourself. There's a manual mode in there somewhere. Also on the Discord servers, Jason Stories Kofi, Jason Weimann's server, Infallible Code server, TaraDev, GameDev Guide. They all have servers that are worth asking questions on and engaging with the communities of.
So there's some chat about the other Jason being back and his new beard. Beard looking good.
Well, I'm going to be going to PAX next at the end of the month, so I have to. I had to actually stop looking like a hobo briefly, so go through the whole shaving and whatnot.
Yeah.
I just want to
Oh,
say
you
I
do
love the
that?
Pride theme.
I went to GDC looking like a hobo, so my wife tried to convince me to get a haircut.
Well, in your case, it looks more like a wizard, so it works, right? In
Yeah.
my case, in my
Yeah,
case, I just look
that's
sick.
no, I was sweats and hoodies, and I wore my nice shoes, and that was it. Like I'll wear my nice shoes and my normal normal around the house clothes. All right. Let's see. Oh, somebody asked if they can share the link to the Unity developer Discord. I don't see why not. Yeah, drop that in chat, please. And then here's another question. Let's just take it. So if you guys have questions, just drop them in chat. We'll pop them up and go through them. And then I think in maybe just a few minutes, I want to talk about this our place stuff and some of these games, and then get into the writer giveaway. If you want to win a JetBrains writer license, make sure you hang out with us. We'll do the giveaway at the end. So it says, I just got through the first interview at a game studio for an entry programmer, and now they have to meet other team members, the lead designer, producer, CEO. What are questions they might ask? So this is going to be not the programmers. So they're not going to be asking, they're probably not going to ask being too many code questions. You might get one or two from somebody who likes to talk about code stuff. But what kinds of questions do you guys expect to see from like a CEO or producer, a designer?
Jason, do you want to take that?
Sure. I think, to be honest, this actually rolls into the question that you were talking about just before I actually joined, which is you were talking. It was about reaching out to YouTubers and things. I think the general takeaway is when you first start looking at these very targeted problems, you get really fixated on how do I solve this particular thing. But the more you do different jobs with different people and the more books you read on how to win friends and influence people and those kinds of books, you start to realize there's a very common thread through every single one of these things, which is people have goals and objectives, and they want things, and then people like people who help them with the things they're trying to achieve. And so when it comes to the YouTuber question, the answer is simply provide value to them, which is why every one of us who receives a generic blanket email is going to ignore it, because you're already saying that you're putting yourself before us. You're contacting us with a request and not wanting to work with us. And that's why smart emails reach out and say, I like your stuff. And not just a dot, I like your stuff, dot, dot, dot. They specifically say, here is things you do, which is why I'm reaching out to you, because there is some connection between what we're doing and what you're doing. Which brings me back to this question, which is the kinds of questions they're going to ask will be directly correlated to whatever their job is and what they expect from you. So in the case of people above you in the hierarchy chain, it's going to be, what can you do for me? They're not going to say that outright, but that's what they're going to be alluding to, which is, are you going to be here for a while? Are you the kind of person who's driven? So you'll get questions like, where do you see yourself in X years? That question isn't really about where you see yourself. That's, are you going to be here in X years? Do you care about this company? You want to stay here? Is it worth us investing time in you as a person? And if we do, will that contribute to us, or will that be something that you'll take away from another company? So every single question you're going to get will boil down to, whatever my objectives are, how can you contribute towards it? And that's why the people who are most successful networkers, or people who other people like to work with, are people who see that and will phrase their answers in a way that best contributes to the other person's objectives. So find out what the other person wants to do, and then try your best to help them. That's pretty much the answer to almost every single one of those questions regarding dealing with other people.
Perfectly spoken, first off. Secondly, if you are talking about more practical questions they might ask you, a designer might want to know that you'll help them expose things, because if they need to design something, they want to be able to tweak values, they want to have an easy space to do it. You have to make sure that you mention that to them. And a producer might want to be able to be on top of things. So you're going to show that you have good communication and that you can tell them when you're working on X and Y, that they'll actually be aware of that state. You don't just wave your hands and say, I'm going to take an infinite amount of time figuring out what I need to do when I need to do it. I also see the GTC talk about everybody who's watching this is fired, which has 50 base standards questions that will show up with this kind of montage of team members asking you stuff. The questions that show up there are exactly what you're looking for. If you need Gatling gun speed solving process for all these.
Yeah, I think those are, you guys already hit all of the the important stuff. I guess the last thing I want to mention is that if you know who these team members are, also just do a little bit of research on them. Find out who they are, what they like, if you guys have anything in common while you're talking too. So that way you can kind of at least guide or lead towards that if you need to, and have some extra open communication. If you guys can talk for 2-3 minutes about something that you both like before the interview, it eases the rest of the thing, right? whether it's a game that they worked on, a hobby that you both share, or something that is obvious, like they're wearing their surf shirt or whatever, or they have their surfboard with them, and you like that. Those kinds of things help a lot. And if you do a little research in advance, yeah, it helps because I think it's good to know who you're talking to before you're talking to. You never know if like they invented something that you fucking love and have been using all your life, or like you just never know. So you got to look into them first. So that's my recommendation. On top of, I think the stuff that you guys said was all much more important though, but I don't want to repeat it. So
And I think something else to note, just and this goes for any scenario you're working with people. You know your field and you know what it can or can't do, and other people know their field and what it can or can't do. And what endlessly amazes me is the amount of times I'll meet with somebody and there's something I can program or automate that would make their lives 10 times easier. Now it won't be quite the same as a junior developer, especially not in a games team. But if you're working in enterprise and you're talking to somebody who's an artist or on a UX team or doing some data ingest, they might be doing something that's a lot of Excel work that you could write a quick script to automate or something. And so I find showing genuine interest in what they do and just asking, it says, hey, I'm new, I don't know everyone's jobs here, I'd love to know what you do and how it works. And that doesn't just give them an opportunity to gush about what they do, which is great because it's learning for you. People are also a lot more open and easy to talk to when they're talking about stuff they're comfortable with. And then if you look at it, you can go, oh, there's something. Do you do that manually? And they'll be like, maybe some of this stuff I do. How long? Say, how long would that take you? Well, um, would you be open if I made a little app for you or something that would help you out that would do that thing? And you could find that's a great way to ingratiate yourself with new team members. Again, not quite the same with game stuff, but I found in a lot of enterprise work, people have jobs and it never occurs to them to automate it. It just comes with the landscape of being into tech and programming that you think that way. But a lot of people are just quite happy doing very manual, repetitious jobs because it never occurs to them that, like, yes, you could write a script to do this because you know what the limitations are. So yeah, just something to put out there. If you see somebody doing a job, ask them what it is, and you might be able to do something that makes their life a lot easier. And that's about the best introduction you can give.
yeah, I found that to be the case in games too. I know you said in enterprise you saw it a lot, but I've seen that a lot in games, especially with designers. A lot of the time, designers will be shown a process, they're given a process, and they will just repeat that process without pushing back too much on the slow and hard part. So they show you the slow hard part, and you're like, oh, I could automate this and save you like a day's work, in 10 minutes. And yeah, it's definitely handy. Plus, you get that benefit of, I think, like you're saying, seeing what everybody's doing in a much wider view of the company, the game, or the applications that you're working on. So super handy.
Just to add on the top of that, in the kind of last bit, if you want some easy wins to show that you can make people's lives easier, making easy editors for designers, making easy importers or exporters for artists. For QA, you can make some tool to easily get all the change logs from your Git, version control, whatever you're using. There are ways in which you can deliver tons of value with really easy wins that nobody's implementing for some reason, especially in the smaller companies in games.
Yeah, sometimes
And
even just
deliverables
setting up
too.
build automation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And oftentimes there's a delivery process between, say, an art department and the main team or something. And you'll be surprised how many times I'll drop it in the Google Drive for you, or I'll zip a file up and send it to you. And it's like, well, that's fine, but normally there's an unspoken step. The amount of time somebody does their best and like neatly names and organizes a bunch of things and then puts it in a folder. And then the person who receives it opens the folder and neatly names and organizes it completely different to whatever their needs are for whatever they're importing. And so there's this extra work being done on both sides where both people are trying to be polite to the other person, but they've never actually stopped and said, what format do we need this in? And if you can see that bridged gap, you can actually have people go, well, if we agree to name them this way, I don't have to spend 20 minutes going through the files and like renaming or structuring it differently. So sometimes you can spot these kinds of things too.
Yeah. And just a small addendum on that. All of these things are easier than they sound. Usually they won't take you more than an hour of writing stuff. And if you look at Warped Imaginations videos, he actually has pretty good tutorials on how to make easy editors for designers, for example. Something that you can really watch in 20 minutes and implement yourself going forward.
All right, I want to take a couple more questions. This one's super fast. Was there an update about masterminds already? Yes, that was at the beginning. We were working on it. There's some technical issues once it did a deployment to the production domain to get up all the automation stuff. So we're working on fixing that. Hopefully today have an update. We'll see. As soon as it's done, though, I'm going to send out an email and get as many people in as possible. We've already got a couple groups going, and it's going okay. I'm going to get it scaled up as much as possible soon. This question was about publishers. If I have a full-time day job and I make games on the side for fun, would I still seek a publisher? I'm not ready to quit my job, so would the publishers want me to be full-time? My initial answer to this is no, you don't want a publisher. What do you guys think, though?
It's more nuanced than you don't want a publisher. Publishers have values in areas, and you need to figure out what these areas are. Because when you're working with a publisher, two things tend to happen. One, you get some lump sum upfront to help the development cost of your product. Two, they take a percent of every sale, and they help advertising the product for you because you might not have the access to it. The third one that varies way more is depending on the person who publishes for you, they might give you connections to other developers that have services that you don't easily find. For example, if you don't know how to localize, if you don't know how to port, they might have people that they can point you to help you out. But all of these things come at the cost of you no longer fully own what you're making. You lose some of the responsibility, you lose some of the control. And these days, it's way easier to do what publishers tended to need to do. You have direct access to your entire audience via Twitter, you have entire access via YouTube. You can put the game on Steam, no publisher required, just by paying a few bucks and putting some checkboxes on the Steam backend. It isn't as difficult as it used to be. Therefore, you no longer need it as much.
Yeah, I would say again, it comes down to like different publishers will promise you different things, and it comes down to what you need. To be completely honest, the main reason I think in this day and age people want a publisher is because a publisher will give you the money up front to quit your job. It's not about a matter of they want you to. It's that realistically, making a game is hard and it takes a lot of time. And if you're doing it in your free time, you'll take a long time to do it and you may not get it done. And so if you're genuinely pushing to the point where you're trying to finish a game, or you don't have the resources even if it's just time resources to do a full-time job and then work in a game, a publisher can give you the freedom to not have to acquire work other ways and power through and make your game. So in a lot of cases, it's actually more beneficial for a publisher if you actively need that time and that extra resources. Again, you can probably do a lot of it yourself these days. I'm not much of a gambler though. If I was going to make a game for my release for first one, I would bite the bullet and say like it's a lot less of a gamble if you have resources behind you. I wouldn't pick any publisher. There's like I would seriously vet them, and there's a lot of them out there. And if I would again, you also want to align your publisher with the kind of game you're making. Certain publishers are known for certain kinds of games. If you pick the wrong one, you're going to end up getting into the wrong. They'll have resources that match the kinds of content they create. Um, but yeah, if it was me, I probably would because I think the benefits outweigh the costs in terms of a percentage of something is better than 100% of nothing. And in this day and age, with the amount of games being released on a semi-regular basis, I would rather take the extra resources to have a product that's finished because what people don't realize is it's not just about the money you make on your first game, it's the cachet of having it done. Someone who has a game done will find every future step easier, not only the making and the development, but finding more publishers because you've now proven yourself once. You'll get more funding because you suddenly have a lot more doors open to you. So if you're willing to bite the bullet on your first game and like give up more of it, I would say for a lot of people, if it's your first game, it's probably a smarter choice to go publisher. But personal preference. If you think you could do it all yourself, you can. But while you can do all the marketing stuff yourself, that's a job too. People forget that that's a job. If you have to simultaneously make your game, manage your social sphere, do all your marketing, and then deal with everything else that comes with that, that can be hugely overwhelming. So
Do you
if you
know
think
how
you can do it,
publishers feel about like part-time dev work though? I'm just curious. I mean, I've never really talked to a publisher in that kind of context. So is that something that they're generally open to? Like you're working on a game, but
yeah,
you also have another
yeah.
full-time job. They're generally okay with that.
I'm not entirely sure. I've talked to people who've talked to publishers. I know people who've released games. I haven't done it myself, but I've heard that oftentimes they'll even actually add people for you. Like they'll help you find a developer to work on it full time with you if that's what you need. Um, from what I've heard, a good publisher is accommodating. because at the end of the day, they're making money off your success. So they kind of do want you to be successful. It's just a matter of whether they think you'll be successful will dictate how much resources they'll give you. If they think you'll be partially successful, they'll only put a small amount of resources to you. If you look like you're onto something, they will put a lot of backing behind you. So I think they'll be accommodating, providing you look like you're onto something.
Yeah, they sometimes might even try to push you in certain directions and give you the resources for those directions. For example, if you did not plan on localizing, they might say, hey, this game would actually be really popular with that one language that you're not using because that demographic tends to like these kinds of games more. So here's a person who can actually help you implement localization, and we might even provide for some of the time that it'll take to do it, given access or whatever. As a general note, different portions of the world prefer different games. There's quite a bit of things to look up on that, but you might be surprised at how well your game resonates with one audience versus another.
Interesting. That reminds me of something I saw yesterday on Reddit about how 17,000 divorces in Egypt in 2018 cited Candy Crush as the reason for their divorce. I don't know, just thinking of the games that people play everywhere and the fact that that was that big a deal there even. Okay, we want to jump on to the next question. It looks like Daniel actually super chatted this question after I popped it up. So we'll just take this one and then maybe just go to that one. So it says, any advice on the best method of getting up to speed quickly if you're new to Unity and C Sharp? And then there's another version of it. Oh, is it not popping up? Oh yeah. So other than tons of practice, what are the resources that you guys recommend?
So with Unity, the main gist is to try and get stuff done. So the best method of getting up to speed quickly is to just watch recent tutorials and seeing how fast people will just knock things out as part of trying to make something bigger. You just need an audio listener to do whatever thing you're trying to make, or you're just putting a line renderer here and dragging two portions, and there you go. There's a speedy line to go through for your racing game or whatever you need to. Basically speaking, if you're trying to get up to speed and quickly, you're going to try and watch how other people who already know the engine do the things they do and just try to replicate the steps, because things that you might read about 2 whole pages of might just end up being 2 buttons and knowing that one fact that you can say in 2 sentences. And basically watching the people do it as if it's nothing will let you do it the same way if you're confident in that. On C# and tons of practice, it's a bit more nuanced. I think, Jason, sorry, you might have a better opinion here on what to do. But yeah, go on.
The problem with that is just, the only thing I have is that saying how you get up to date on Unity and C# is so broad. It's kind of like 2 different entire areas. I would say that the first step is figure out your objectives. If it's Unity and C# because I want to make games, or if it's I want a career, you'll take different paths. But again, a lot of this stuff boils down to exactly the same answer. If you were to ask me how to become a writer or a 3D modeler or whatever, the answer is always the same, which is as soon as something moves from being purposeful to being muscle memory, you have a lot more freedom to be creative. So to be good at things, you first of all have to be automatic with things. And that doesn't matter what it is you're doing. And that's why every writer will give you the advice, write more. Write every day if you want to be a writer. If you want to be a game dev, make stuff every day. If you want literal practical steps, like I think Udemy is probably the best way to get started, because you don't need to be good at C# to start. You need to be good at getting things made. Making things is harder than C# as a language or Unity as an engine. Just doing things, starting from something, from nothing to something, is the hardest thing a person can do. And so if you want to make games, go to Udemy, take the courses, and literally follow step by step and finish them. And then when you're done, try to change them. And you iterate that way and make as many things in the short amount of time as possible. Join game jams, etc., etc. It's exactly the same advice. It'll never change. Do as much as possible. And the easiest way to do as much as possible is to take small bites and do them in cyclical steps. There's a reason why repetition learning is the most famous method of memorization, will lead to learning, because it's not just about storing the words, it's about recall. And the more you repeat stuff, the harder it holds, and then the less you think about it, and the more stuff is in your back of your mind, the more you can kind of relax and take new information in. The hardest part of learning is that everything is slow and purposeful, and you want to get past that very quickly. And the way you do that is to make it automatic. And the way automatic is to keep doing it a lot. So it'll be the same answer for every similar question.
I'm going to bookmark this video after we're done so I can keep watching what you just said over and over.
Yeah, practice is super important. And just actually doing it. For me, like I always feel like just writing code is what makes me better. Trying new things, finding new solutions, and then just experimenting and practicing. Like find that I feel like that's when I grow the most. That and like you already said, watching lots and lots of up to date videos. It's also important to make sure that you don't watch terrible videos. Like if you find
Yeah.
videos and they're doing things, that's I think one of the harder parts. Like finding resources and making sure that you avoid the one that tells you to do the wrong thing, that is outdated and didn't work right or was bad advice 10 years ago and is still bad advice. So watch out for those. But that's why I like a big variety of stuff. And I just dropped in a link for my free beginner course too on Unity.
I
So
just want to touch on that and say that if someone is doing something quickly, it doesn't exactly matter if it's the worst, because even if they're doing something right or wrong, if it takes them a lot of time and you try to figure out how to get up to pace quickly, just getting the something done and learning how to do it better later is a far better, more appealing approach than just knowing how to do it right the first time but taking a shit ton of time doing it.
oh
Because
yeah,
yeah, and
without a doubt.
generally speaking, you don't start making a AAA game with the full-on quality and all the blemishes and the shiny sparkles and all that. You're starting off trying to make something simple. You learn the nuances of what you're trying to make something better, and then you approach how to get it a tiny bit better every time. You don't make the fully fledged tons of feature thing from the get-go. You can't do it when you're a beginner. You don't know what you don't know. That's what I was forgetting, and I'm trying to say the entire time.
So here's a question that apparently there isn't a guide for on how to make a slot machine game. And they want to know how they check to see if the sprite matches the winning lines and make it show. I think that it's important to note here that you probably want to add, you're probably missing a bit of a layer there of some data that you're comparing. So if you're building out a slot machine game, for everybody who hasn't seen a slot machine, it's just got like usually 3 or 5 wheels that spin, and if you get them all in a line or whatever, and they match or they match some pattern, you win whatever, some multiplier. If you're doing that, you shouldn't necessarily be comparing the sprites that are showing there. You should be comparing some sort of data object that's referencing that sprite. Some bit of data that this is, a bar or a double bar or a whatever the thing is on your character. A lot of times they're like stacks of gold bars and stuff. So you should be storing that and then have that associated with an icon and then be doing a comparison of those objects or those data objects. Um, what do you guys think? How would you set this up? I almost want to make a slot machine game now.
Generally speaking, it's really just a 2D array of numbers scrolling down from a fixed column that just keeps cycling what it has. So if you're just making a console application in C#, you can already make a slot machine. Then you can take that and then just port it into Unity, but make it a wheel. And depending on the number that rolls, the offset of the column that you've been cycling, you just make the wheel end up in that situation. It's really simple, relatively. There isn't a lot to actually do here. You really just try to put an array of the things from the wheel come out in this order, and then just pick one at random and do the animation so it ends up in that one. When the things move fast and the player presses stop, you don't necessarily have to stop at the exact frame that they asked you to. You can just say, yeah, start animation, roll something random. It's going to look fine in the end of the day, because the animation plays a big part in what you're actually going to get. Players don't know that when they stop, they're going to get the exact thing they clicked on.
So the next question was about learning Unity stuff as a C# dev. And it looks like Jason dropped out. I assume he'll be back in.
Yeah.
I assume he's having some technical problem or something. It says, I would like to learn concepts behind Unity. Tutorials show how to do things, but not always how do they work. So can you recommend any sources to learn it? Are the Unity docs good? I think in general, yes, the Unity docs, they used to be pretty bad, but they've gotten really good at being detailed and explaining things. JetBrains also has some updated additional docs on how some things work, or how and why some things work the way that they do. I always recommend my own Unity courses and tutorials and stuff and videos. But what other sources for like how things work can you think of? Is there anything else that like dives into like the details of
It's
how different work?
so there was a problem of trying to figure out what the actual question here is, because it's a bit nuanced to say how things work. When you're trying to make a game, you're saying, I want the player to feel good doing whatever it is I'm having them do. So where you start to get into the analysis of what you're actually trying to make. If you're just asking about how the code works for these, a ton of Unity's own code is made in packages that you can literally open in the project manager in the bottom and just look at the package's source code and see how it ticks. The fundamentals tend to be don't allocate memory, try to put all the memory that you access frequently together so that you can read it faster, and then just manage some collections in a neat way so that users in the end of the day can just say thing.do something and it works. But it's like the concepts behind Unity are just, we are trying to get, as Unity, they're saying, we are trying to get you something that easily works for your purposes. This and that kind of feature are nice. We're implementing them in the way that makes most sense to implement them. But there isn't like any how it ticks fundamental that you can look at aside from the source code and the concepts that make the source code work. If you see something that you don't know there, then you can look it up and ask yourself why. Also, patterns are a common thing that you will see being used in these packages, and patterns are just common solutions to known problems. So this is maybe the kind of thing you're looking for. Wild David appeared.
Wild David. Jason, you look so different.
What?
Jason's story was just there and he disappeared a second ago.
Yeah.
He reappeared as
Okay,
Jason.
well, I'm here now. Sorry.
Well, now that you're here, can I bombard you with a question right away?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. I
So
was literally just like delving into code, and then I was like, "Oh crap, that's the time. I should be somewhere else."
Yeah, it's all good. So this question, we were talking about the average pay for freelance developers, and people were talking about what they were charging in chat, and people were charging everywhere from I think 30 up to around 150 an hour. And then one of the questions that came up then that I didn't pop up until now, I just realized, was about having a degree and wondering whether or not that makes a difference. Does having a degree in computer engineering matter? I charge £6 an hour for freelancing, but consider myself a beginner. Can having a degree affect the hourly rate? So if you're hiring a freelancer, does the fact that they have a degree impact how much you will pay them?
Personally, me, no. I couldn't give a crap whether you got me. I look at your portfolio and I go, how good is this person according to the stuff I can see right there and then? Because you doing a degree, you could have come out and been rubbish at your degree and just about scraped by. Maybe you're one of those people that can memorize a book from back to cover and from cover to back, either which way, whichever way around you read it. Maybe you're one of those people that can just memorize a book and then come back and recite lines to me of a book, but you have no clue how to actually do it. And I've got a funny story about that. When I'd done an engineering degree way back in the day, and what happened for me is I was in a networking test one day, and I came out
networking, like code networking.
Network infrastructure.
Okay.
I moved to the side, somebody's complaining. And basically, I came out of that and I said to a friend of mine, I said, well, I knew what it was all about, but I think I put absolutely rubbish answers because I'm terrible at tests. And he turned around to me and said, oh, yeah, I aced it. He goes, ask me any question. I said, well, there was a question on this. He goes, it's page this in that book. And it's about halfway down. And he had a photographic memory or whatever you call it. And he could remember sections. But in saying that, he turned around and he goes, but the funny thing is, I don't even know how to put a computer together, let alone build a whole network. Whereas back in my apartment at university, I'd set up cables everywhere. It was a fire hazard, basically. There were cables everywhere with routers and switches and all the rest. And I had it all set up to work perfectly for when I had LAN parties and stuff like that. So yeah, degrees to me are meaningless because I want to see a portfolio that comes with it. But the problem you've got is a lot of big companies, they still filter people. And when they filter people for interviews, they still look for degrees. And it's a way of filtering down, basically taking down the 1,000 applications down to 100 applications or maybe even 50 applications. And sometimes a degree is within that filter, and that could be a problem.
Do you think that's as much an issue for freelancers like this case?
Not so much. Freelancers tend to be a little bit different. When I'm hiring a freelancer, a lot of times I won't hire junior freelancers because I want to get a job done and I don't need somebody learning on the job unless there's something in particular that they wouldn't have been able to learn outside of the actual job itself. So I'll hire somebody with experience. So, for instance, if I was going to hire a computer engineer, for instance, to do some coding for me, and I'm hiring a freelancer, there's a job, a specific thing I need to get done. I'm going to hire somebody that can do that job, come in and get the job done, pump it out. So I won't care that they've got a degree. I'll care that they can get the job done, and they've got stuff that can point to say that's where I've done this particular job before.
Cool. Welcome back, Jason.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had some technical difficulties there.
He missed me, so he came back.
Yeah, exactly. I saw you were here. I had to come back in.
Actually,
I do have one thing because I did miss. There was a topic I did want to respond to just before I got booted by my internet, which is someone was talking about tutorial hell and how you can fall into the trap of just doing endless tutorials after tutorials and not really getting anywhere. And so I thought I'd break something down that I kind of works for me at least, which is there's a great in David Allen's book on getting things done. He talked about the concept of projects, and it was very interesting to me that he describes a project as anything that is not in the state it needs to be, that has one or more actions that could be done on it, which seems really weird and broad. But what that means is it's easy to define something as a project that can be completed. And that should be your first clue, is that when we're talking about tutorials or learning or making a game or whatever, it should be a project, which means it should be definable. And following the business principles of a smart plan, you should be able to define that it's done because there's actions to be done on it, and the actions aren't done, they need to be done. My point in saying this is if you're stuck in tutorial hell, it's because you haven't got an objective. And so if you're trying to make a game, it should go downstream. It should be, I want to make a game, but I don't have the knowledge I need to make a game. And so I have to learn. And so I have to acquire information. How do I do that? Well, I take a tutorial. And then by following a tutorial, the goal of that should be to learn so that I can subsequently make the game. And so it all flows downstream, but there's an objective in each step. If you're watching a tutorial and you're asking yourself, well, why am I watching this? Will I now, after watching this, be able to do something as a result of it? So tutorial hell isn't so much that you're just endlessly repeating things. You're endlessly repeating things to no end. If you specifically are trying to make something, follow tutorials that help you make that thing. So the truth is, it's comforting to just sit and watch tutorials because nothing's asked of you. You can just sit and watch them and feel smarter without engaging or having done anything as a result. So tutorial hell isn't a thing that's done to you. It's a thing you choose to do because it's comfortable. It's the devil you know. So the truth is, if you want to make something, the only excuse is you're not doing it. It's that just you have to do it yourself. You have to decide, this is what success looks like. These are the steps required to get to success. I now have to go and do those things. So the truth is, the tutorial hell is something you can. You just have to look at it yourself and go, wait a minute, am I doing this because it's comfortable not to work on the real thing? Or am I actually, it's not an external force against you. It's entirely yourself.
Yeah.
If you want to feel better. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, a lot of times when I pick out a tutorial, it's one, I've got nothing better to do and I'm just sitting here and I don't particularly want to work. So I'm going to just procrastinate by sitting there watching tutorials. Or two, I've got a problem. And there's a problem that I'm seeing that I'm trying to solve, and I'm going to go and find some information on how to solve that. And once I've got that information, I come back and solve it. Like, I think, procrastination is the devil in the detail on that one.
Yeah. The one thing that people tend to kind of hold themselves into, aside the comfort of tutorial hell, is saying, well, I don't need this piece of knowledge right now, but if I learn it, I might learn new things that I didn't know about, or I'm going to get this tool for when I finally need it 2 years down the line. You're not. It might be useful to learn some new concepts, but generally speaking, you're going to forget it if you don't immediately use it. So if you want to still stay in the tutorials for a bit, but stop calling it hell, define a project and things that you don't know how to do yet. Look for specific tutorials on how to do those. And once you've watched all the tutorials that you told yourself at the beginning that you'll watch, start doing the thing instead of just watching more tutorials.
And it can be hard, to be fair, to know the metric about when that time hits, when you should stop and when you should work on things. The truth is, like, it simply boils down to understanding. If you're watching a tutorial, it should be to understand something. I don't know how to do this. I don't know where that is. I don't know why people apply that pattern. If you're watching a tutorial and you know the answer to that question, like, I admit I enjoy watching design pattern tutorials, although I'm doing it because I enjoy watching how people teach and I'm trying to, deconstruct that. But when I watch it, if I watch it and go, oh, I fully understand what they're saying this because these reasons, it's not a tutorial anymore. It's an affirmation of something I already know. So the truth is, when you're watching a tutorial and you know what they're saying, you understand it, the job's done. So the tutorial, don't repeatedly do multiple tutorials on the same thing, because you've done the job. You understand the steps. It's about learning and understanding. If you're not getting something out of it, move on to something else.
I also don't provide any code with any of the tutorials I put up online, because I think people should go out there and watch what's happening and then do the code themselves, not just copy paste, because you won't learn a thing from doing that. You'll just be entering. You might as well just be downloading a plugin. If you're watching a tutorial, then write it out and alter it, fix it, break it, mess with it. But yeah, I had somebody ask me the other day to provide code for my tutorials, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. Go and write it.
I say the same thing. I don't like the idea of giving people projects. Now, there's a difference between dissecting stuff versus using it wholesale. And this actually comes back to one of the very first questions I saw when I jumped on, which is people are talking about, is it okay to still, when you're still looking for code, how long have you doing it for or whatever? That'll never change. I'll be honest, it's same with everyone here. If you're working on a project, your goal is to get it done. You will, if you can find a piece of code that does exactly what you need, you'll be an idiot not to use it. It literally does the thing you need. The difference is, if you take the time to understand it, you can modify it to your needs. And then next time around, you can either write it first time yourself faster, or when you find something, you can much quicker take something that isn't fit for purpose and make it fit for purpose. The point of the learning is not that, oh, great, I can now make everything from scratch myself. That's foolish. Just because I know how JSON works, it doesn't mean I'm not going to use JSON.NET like everyone else in the entire world, because of course I am. It's robust, it works, it's what it's for. So it's not about, you're not learning to make everything yourself. You're learning for understanding so that you can retrofit stuff to your purposes. So feel free to use code that's there. But like we said, we're not going to give you answers that you're going to drop in when it comes to the educational perspective, because that's the point. It's education. It's not answers to your problems. If you want those, they're out there on other websites.
On the final topic regarding the...
Yes. Well, thank you.
Yes, you do.
I'm taller.
That's like the way of saying you look drunk,
So. well, that is just my default state, unfortunately. But yeah.
For everybody who can't see the screen, I popped up the comment that said that Dave looks like Tony Stark.
Really does.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out
his lab and office looks like Tony's too. So if you ever get a chance to go check it out, go meet Jarvis in there.
I haven't got Jarvis working yet, but soon.
It's a process. You'll get it done. You already have eye tracking going.
I do have eye tracking in this office, yes.
So I just wanted to point out that aside the educational perspective on more advanced nuanced topics, for a person that asked finding advanced tutorials and stuff, usually you won't, because tutorials tend to go towards people who don't know a lot and cover the easy things. Advanced tutorials are hard to find, both because you don't know what you're searching for terminology-wise, and the content is difficult and has a smaller audience. Therefore, it's harder to find someone who wants to make it. On my own end, I tend to not like having people bang their head against the wall trying to figure out how to make a wheel. I tend to try and explain to them, yeah, so you make a wheel because, and here's a solution on how to. That said, I'm not in the educational field. On Jason Story's Discord server, I tend to try and provide as much of the code as I can to try and solve people having headaches. People who are in the server tend to already know quite a lot. So just be aware of when you can ask for code versus when you can ask for understanding. The beginning, you want to understand how you do stuff. When you already know how to do a lot, you can just communicate with code and just ask for something to see really quick to figure out what you need.
Yeah, I mean, I've been ripping Unity to shreds recently, trying to do certain things that it just doesn't want me to do. And there are no tutorials on that stuff because they don't want you to do it. But yeah, just look up their classes and start messing with them and see what happens.
The classes, and also read the package's source code, because they tend to do really simple things that you don't know about, like rect transform utility class and interfaces in places you never expected.
Yeah,
Sweep test.
I was writing some stuff to highlight things on the hierarchy because I was writing a package that was if something's broken, like if you've missed an entry on one of your fields, I wanted that to highlight on the inspector, but then I actually wanted to highlight things on the hierarchy to say you've got an error here, and you can feed all the way through to the final error. I actually started doing it because I watched Jason Weimann's video on the new Rider stuff. And I really hated the way they done groups. And I was like, no, you could do it better than that. So it took me down a rabbit hole. Thanks for that, Jason. I lost 2 days. But started to mess. Yeah, thank you. But starting to mess with that. Of course, they don't show a lot of that stuff. And there's not a lot of tutorials around. So I just started hacking it to bits and then put it in a tutorial.
I did something similar, but in my case, I built my own hierarchy tree. It's a hierarchy that shows fields on the hierarchy as opposed to, so it's the second hierarchy that expands down, and then it changes the icon for the color that matches the ones that are incorrect. And then I added filter buttons and things to filter to which ones. And I had a big fix button that would iterate through and then run, get components and things to try to figure out where the missing components are. So it's funny. We came to a very similar thing. The only difference I think I added is I added a custom required attribute on the fields, because I think there's a distinction to be made between fields that are required versus fields that are allowed to be null. And so by adding my own attribute to those, I could very clearly. Okay, cool. Yeah, so we came to the same conclusion.
Yeah, because you want people to be able to not do it. And also I didn't want, because I used the onValidate on that as well. Actually, it's a video that's going out today on this. I used the onValidate on that as well. And I didn't want to put out, I've seen a lot of people use the onValidate. And then when somebody takes something off a field, like say they have an object that they're popping on, like, oh, this object has to have the main camera. So they have a field they could drag and drop the main camera onto that particular component. And what they do is in the onValidate, they actually pump out errors because you've removed the item from that. And I'm like, no, it really shouldn't error at that point because your designer is going to be annoyed. You're changing that thing over is going to be an error. Well, oh, it's errored because I'm literally changing something. So I put that, and then I had all the highlighting thing and used the property drawers for all that sort of stuff. But yeah, on the hierarchy, I whip up and down the thing to recolor certain things on it and put errors and stuff.
Yeah, so here, this is just me. I built my own one, which has a hierarchy tree where I can turn on or off levels of roots from game objects or components. And then the icon is diamond will be a different color depending on whether it's the required dependency or not. And if you hit the question mark, it'll jump over to the hierarchy. And then it says required field missing. If you fix it, it'll call a fix function and do basically exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I just realized we're not cut out of the same cloth, and I'm a heretic. I had a really complex project at one point where I tried to make the hierarchy show me where each of the objects in the scene view is. So I literally tried to make the hierarchy draw arrows into the scene view to tell me this is that and this is that. And I had no off button, and it would do it to every scene view you have, including the game view, which was terrible.
Well, my biggest problem with the JetBrains thing was this grouping thing they do on it. One, you have this empty transform for a group to assign, and then you have this big bold color thing that just goes right across the line there. And I was just like, no, that's hurting my senses. So I have a nice little little color thing with a name of the group in it next to the item that you just assign to it. So you say, this one, I want to be in this group. And it just, you could just assign any actual object in your hierarchy to that group, and it would just put a tag next to it and then color the little box beside it to the color of that thing. And then all the children will color under that. So you can still see that things are in the same group. But then it offsets it a little bit, because if you put a prefab in there, then the little arrow that you have now that you can press to go into the prefab to alter it is covered up. Now, obviously, that I don't want to just put random transforms in there just for grouping, because that annoys me, because some things might be a group that's off the parent, off the root, or something like that, and I don't want to color all those or put transforms in there for that. So I basically just had it that you would assign things to a group. And now I'm trying to mess with Unity to see how I want to save that data off, because you can put it in the user data on the metadata, which is just horrible, and it won't let you put other things. I don't want to have just random empty objects just sitting all over the place, and I don't want to use the singleton serialization thing that they have that you can put into project settings. So I'm messing with loads of different things on that, but I'm probably just going to make my own little sort of metadata, well, not metadata as such, I suppose it's editor data file that sits next to my normal file. And then the file, when it saves and marks dirty and all the rest of it, will save that file at the same time. So it's seamless in the action that it does that. And Unity gives you the ability to do all those sort of things. But yeah, the grouping thing, it just hurt my sensitivity. So I had to go. All the rest of it's awesome, but I just didn't like the grouping.
No, I actually...
Like the
look of it, but I had problem. I would say there was the one part that I actually ran into a bug with, and I talked about this earlier, so I won't go back into it. But I like the way that it looks. Like, it felt perfect for me because it like forced into like very visual groups. But I want to see your solution now too, and see it kind of side by side, because I didn't like the fact that it hits the transforms. But I was wondering if that was just because they ran into too many issues trying to do it other ways, or just didn't think it would be an issue, or what it was. I mean, a lot of people right now just use transforms as groups. So maybe they just kind of went with like, this is what people are doing now, we'll just make a slightly better version of that.
Yeah,
to be fair,
if I can share the screen.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying Rider Flow. I downloaded it. I haven't gotten around to it yet, but I used to love Peak, so this does look like a nice version of that. So I'm curious.
Yeah, so you've just literally changed the... No, go back.
I'm making it big.
I can move it. It's fine. I can move it.
Okay.
It's fine.
We're gonna make it
literally, you changed the screen size and all the group things were off the side. Yeah, so I just have some colors. Can you see the screen? There you go. Yeah, I just put colors with a little tag in there, and then I color the objects. Obviously, I'm not going to start messing with this because I'm literally changing all the data around, so it will freak out as soon as I start doing things on it. But the other thing was, I'm not going to be able to show it on this one. Let me pump up a different scene and go to manager. The other thing is, if you remove something from there, so there's the highlighting there, just puts a little exclamation mark and marks it as red, and then you have this component actually highlighting the inspector as red as well, to show that you've removed something, but it's not erroring all over the place. But as soon as I press play, the onValidate function runs on play, and this will error out. So it's just, I find it a little bit neater than having this big bloody great green thing sitting in my eye line on the side of my inspector, and I'm trying to do something like graphics on the actual field itself. But there you go.
So yeah, I love this topic because it's very, again, custom down to how we all solve problems. Here's something that I came up with that I quite enjoy. I'm curious what your thoughts are. So we've established some fields are required, some are not. But then there's the concept of fixing a dependency. So you're currently marking dependencies that require fixing. But the next step would be, how would you decide what to do to fix it? And so in certain cases, it's a hierarchy, say a prefab. It's the child objects. It's a gun. Maybe there's a fire point that needs to be assigned for where the bullets spawn from. Or it might be some object with a hierarchy tree of a skeleton or something. Or it might be something with a manager in the scene that has a certain dependency on something you've defined. I've said before, I don't like using things like get component or find object of type. I don't even mean like the big complicated find object of types or the expensive ones. I mean, I don't even like using get component, because at the end of the day, that's work that's being done in Awake, which you can just do in editor time and then not have to do in Awake. And so if you're willing to do it yourself, it's easier. But I understand that when you're sharing scripts and moving things around, that's not always viable. So something I used to do a lot was a context menu function called fix. And what fix would do is it would fix dependencies, because I would basically do things like find with name firepoint. It doesn't mean it has to be there, but it means if a script is broken, in other words, things are missing, and there's a default presumption of where things should be, my button would attempt to fix that thing. And then I realized I wanted to go one step further. Certain fields would fix differently. So I made a different attribute called fixable. And so I had required fields and then fixable fields. And fixable would take in a string that would be a method name that I could run that would, for that field, populate it by either calling firepoint or whatever else. And that is what actually led into the tree, because then you can go down the rabbit hole. And now, when you're searching for things that are missing fields, you can mark ones that are required, but you can mark ones that are fixable. And then you could have an auto fix button that will run on every script which is predefined what its own fix function is, how to fix the appropriate fields. And so you can auto wire up a whole load of stuff because the scripts will auto find out what it needs to do. And I like that because it forces convention, but it doesn't insist on it. It means I can drop a script in, click fix, and it will find the scene objects that are supposed to be scene objects. It'll find the child objects supposed to be child objects. But if you don't want to use those, you can drag your own ones in. So that was something that I came up with. I thought was quite nice, but it's very laborious because it requires a lot of setup to do. But if you follow convention, like anything, it tends to work well.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to add that now. So that's another 2 days gone. Thanks. Yeah. Oh, no, I completely agree. I actually, back in Sony days when I used to write the validators for the big AAA engines, we used to do things like that. When an artist would build something in Maya, we actually had a validation system that when they exported the model from Maya, it would do things like, oh, this has T vertices. Go and get rid of your T vertices because otherwise we're going to have some weird sort of graphical problems, glitches coming up. You've set up a car, but you haven't got the certain settings in the car set up. So do you want to use these? Do you want to use these? Do you want to use these? And in Maya, of course, if you've got T vertices, you can fix them with the tool and all the rest. So yeah, fix buttons are awesome. So now I'm going to have to implement that. Thanks a lot. The other one is presets, which is a nice system that Unity has now where you can set up a few things as presets.
Yeah, with the hierarchy configuration and how I want to use those more, but I just find myself, very rarely, if I want multiple configurations, they tend to fall into prefabs, which I want to instantiate rather than being configured in the editor. I haven't found a lot of cases to use it, but it's a cool feature. I just don't find myself using it very often.
Well, I just created a script that I can drop onto one of my libraries that when I import the library into my project, it has this thing that looks it up and it goes, oh, there's a preset set up in this particular library. And it will actually populate all the presets in Unity with the presets from that library. So I have a selection of presets so I can pop those in each time because you can mess with them in code as well, which was awesome source. But yeah,
see, now I have something I have to go play with. I haven't actually looked at messing with the presets in code. So, yeah.
As far as Terraria goes, or rather Relogic, we using in our prototype projects, we've been using the presets to make importing assets way faster because we already know most of the settings that we are trying to figure out, aside frames in a sprite sheet. Everything else, the pixel perfect importation, the no MIP mapping, all of that can be just settings that you put in a preset. You just select the preset and set how many frames you slice the sprite into, and that works. But we ended up with a lot of assets that needed even the same type of slicing, so we made a preset for that. And you can set the default preset in the Unity project settings, as you mentioned earlier, Dave. That's something that's really useful and works out of the box. Now, unlike you two, I don't like people getting red notifications and having to fix them. I tend to like that things work out of the box. Like if you add a component, just straight up tries to find a dependency, put it in place so that you don't have to think about it. And I try to tend to keep the dependencies really simple to find so that people don't have to even think about where it is. Because if it's supposed to be on the same project, on the same object, Unity already has a component for it, an attribute for it that's perfect, which is the required component, except for when you're trying to remove that required thing to point at something else. So what I do is just serialize field and unvalidate try get component and in the same object. It works so much nicer because you don't even have to specify type these days, because you just say try get component out and then the field itself, and it already type resolves for you. It's been way too convenient and completely spoiled by it because it's just 2 lines of code in the end of the day compared to work that takes 2 days that you guys are trading right now, which is a weird concept.
Oh, it's all good. You got to trade work. He gives me work.
Yeah.
I give him work.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah,
So just for everybody that's watching along, I already started up the giveaway entry. If you want to win a copy of Rider, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, and then choose a race and class in chat. And then you'll be entered as soon as we start. You'll start fighting, and whoever's the last rat standing will win a Rider license. I'm going to leave that up and running in a small window. You'll see your chat pop up as you join, but that's all. So and Jason, I think you chose 2 classes. Pretty sure you picked.
yeah, I just read 2 words in the chat and put them in. I didn't really think about what I was writing. I probably should have. It seems I defaulted to a rat. I'll take it though.
He's out for blood. He's trying to do multi-class.
Yeah, multi-class. Yeah.
Oh, now we're gonna have to add it so that you blend the stats between them. Now that would be a fun
Blend?
YouTube video.
No, stack. Yes.
Or we could do stack. Yeah, let's do that. That would be a fun little video. All right, the urge to get a neck massage is overwhelming.
The real secret is trying to figure out which combo of classes and race can get you to negative HP so you can't ever die.
Oh. That's the perfect. So you just loop over to positive health. We'll switch it to an unsigned int.
Yeah, let's pretend when I put that in, I was just doing QA for you, just trying out all the different variations.
That's the case. So actually, you're right. You were talking before we started. We were talking about big numbers, right? You want to just dive into that real quick because I wanted to talk about that and the r/place thing a little bit before we jump into questions. I have a lot of other questions still starred to hit, and I'm sure people will ask more. But do you want to talk about the big number thing and just dealing with larger numbers than a big int?
Yeah, so, big integer is a topic of its own, but generally speaking, data is stored in the computer on a certain amount of bytes, and a lot of people don't ever have to think about it unless they're working with an incredibly small amount of bytes or really large values. And recently, in Jason Story's Discord server, somebody brought up a topic that was of interest there, which is floating point origins. If you've never heard about that, it's the process by which floats are stored in 4 bytes, which means they have a finite amount of values, but they're trying to present numbers with a decimal point, which can be incredibly small and precise, or really gigantic and still have that amount of detail to them with the decimal point. They can't store infinite values, so they eventually run out and become inaccurate as you go higher and higher. Usually by the 50,000, you can have a 0.1 deviation with every value. And floating point origins mean that if you're making an open world and it has 50 kilometers of distance, at that 50 kilometer mark, you're not going to be able to run precise code. So what do you do?
Everything's going to be off by like 1/100th of a meter at least, right? Just on it. Exactly. That's going to be like your default is everything expected to be off by that.
And for an example of this, a lot of people don't realize this. Take a famous game, Outer Wilds, where it's space, you're flying around. Yeah, you're not really flying around. As you move, the world moves counterbalance to you. An opposite force is applied to the universe. So when you jump, the universe jumps with you. So it is actually trying to maintain your position relative to the origin point, which is very weird to think about when you play the game and you're flying off into space.
Yeah. And I want to let Yori dive into this, but I just wanted to mention that PlanetSide 2, also, this was like a huge issue early on in PlanetSide 2 development. I remember there was lots and lots of talk trying to deal with it because it's a big open world first-person shooter. So it's got to be fast, accurate, and cover giant distances. And this was one of the many problems that they had to solve. That was one of the bigger, more painful ones, I think.
Yeah. It also happened in a few other games, but the general gist is you eventually run out of precise space. So what games try to do is say, well, we only care about the space around the player, the space that the player can see, which is around the camera, which tends to, in Unity's default way, be about 1,000 meters forward. So what the games will tend to do is to just shift the entire playing field back to 0, so that if you are 50 kilometers forward, in the scene, you're actually 0 kilometers forward. You are always the center of the universe, and everything just moves around you. And it's actually really simple to implement in Unity, despite performance concerns at certain points. But I wanted to bring it up because it led into a bigger topic that I talked to Jason a few weeks back, which is big numbers in clicker games, which I know it's your favorite game topic, Jason. But I've been recently getting into it, and I'm trying to figure out, like, how do games get to the 60th exponent of the number? And there's apparently a really interesting data structure for it, where they actually hold a coefficient, which is a small number that can be multiplied by then the exponent, and reach something relatively accurate, but not quite. And it's been like a really interesting rabbit hole of how do you do that? How do you do scientific notation? How do you do all these other things? And I ended up losing 3 days of my life over it. And then I went to the Unity asset store and found an asset for $5.
Yeah, an asset that just stores giant numbers for you.
Yeah.
And probably does the whole game.
Yeah, and it can do it in like 2 doubles. It's like 16 bytes. That's it.
Nice. That is very cool. Somebody asked if they can still ask questions. Yes, you can still ask questions, and you can still enter the rider giveaway. All you have to do is choose a race and class, and we'll kick that off in about a half hour. Give everybody time to jump in, join, and choose the correct race and class so that they win. So what was the asset that you ended up using? Do you remember the name of it?
It was, I think, big number library, something like that. Large number library.
Large number library. Okay.
Let me
find the link and
try and see if I can find a link to it real quick.
And share that with everyone.
Yep.
Cool. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, and I'm glad there's more to hear now, was this r/place. Have you guys been taking a look at that? Have you seen it before? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Other than
the Reddit, the pixel thing.
Yeah. Okay, so have you guys? What about you, Dave? Have you seen this thing? So I think I'll pop it up.
I live in a hovel. I close the world off during the week.
Let me just make sure that it's not too inappropriate real quick.
Yeah, it's a live thing, so it keeps changing, so it's difficult to know upfront.
Then I'll pull it up and share it. So this is a subreddit on, obviously, Reddit, where people are live essentially playing a game or an interactive thing that's filling out this image and fighting. From what I can tell, everybody's kind of just fighting over what's going to be there. And you can go in and click and place a tile. Like I can go screw with this flag right here and go change the color. And now I'm done. I can't do anything for however many minutes. Right? Oh, I got to go down and actually hit the button. So yeah. I'll go mess with somebody's thing real quick for no reason at all. But there we go.
And now everybody's holding a field war on trying to figure out how to get their art in and safe from everybody else. And they're holding shifts on different subreddits saying this group is going to handle it for these hours, and people now have to go in and make sure it stays. And Among Us has been invading everywhere.
Awesome.
So they just coordinate where they're placing the pixels then? The strategy?
Yeah, like Steven said, this is basically just a rehashing of the $1 Million website. This is an older idea, but it's still a fun one.
Except this one's not charging per pixel.
True.
This is a social everybody fighting over it fast and effort, not dollars. Although if they charged $1 per pixel change, they'd probably be doing great.
Well, Reddit make a lot more money than people realize. I don't think they
should just copy this and make it so that it costs a penny to change each pixel each time. It'd be set.
Does that count as an NFT? I'm just kidding. Generally speaking, though, this project has been pretty fun to watch as it evolves through the days. There's been quite a few history pieces within here. People keep trying to change.
I'm going to wait until there's a time lapse. Someone's going to have made a perfect time lapse of this, and it'll be really fun to see.
Yeah,
I've seen a couple short ones.
And actually, I think it opened the first time about 5 years ago, and it's been only open for a few days, and then it got closed down. And I think the same thing is going to happen in this one, which perfectly fair. It's just fun to keep a historical piece of how people fought and how it ended up. I think the creator of this one also was the creator of Wordle. I think I read that somewhere.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I might be wrong. I just remember reading something like that.
I wonder how quickly marketing firms are going to get hold of this and start putting up advertising in it by getting groups together.
Start selling ad space in here.
Yeah,
Like, we'll place
I
your
see
image on
AMC and GameStop. I mean,
yeah. Well, those got big subreddits, right?
oh yeah,
they've got armies there. It'll be when like Chase shows up or some other big bank.
And then it's ruined for
Like
everybody.
Exxon Mobil's logo appears, then you know they've got a service. Well, it's cool. So, have you guys ever built like some of these weirder, like I guess not weird, but like different asynchronous types of games where people kind of like take turns and do things, or played games like these? I mean, this is less of a game, but it reminded me a lot of just the different old asynchronous games. I even remember back in like when I was a little kid, my buddy Roger used to play these like old text adventure games on BBSs where it was super asynchronous, and they're like, it was almost over the internet. So if do you guys ever play or do any like different types of games and things like this?
Created one for social media back in the day where people could post with certain hashtags, and then that would pull off, and then we'd use those hashtags for people to play games with. Different games, like people could use the hashtag and they'd be selected to play a game across a building or something like that with a projection mapping system, or just everybody voting in a stadium to do things using certain hashtags, and then it would affect the way the screens work around them and all the rest.
Corey's calling out Trade Wars. That was another one I remember. Another old asynchronous fun one.
My favorite was always Frozen Synapse, though. That game was so much fun. It's basically soldier chess, and the way it works is you've got all your soldiers, and you figure out what you're going to do, whether you're going to be prone, or whether you're going to walk carefully, or whether you're going to like run from location to location. And what's really fun is you control your units, and then you have to control their units, and then you press play and watch it play out. You know, that guy watches this corner, he holds that flank, that person, you know, scouts that area, they try to sprint to the better position over there, and then you try to guess what the other person's going to do, and you play it out, and when you're confident that you've got the best strategy, you lock it in, and then they lock it in, and then both your strategies play at the same time, and you see what really happened. And it's this back and forth, and what's really cool, again, you'll get an email to say it's your turn now. So you can take your time, you can really do this over weeks and weeks, and then when you're done, there's a button to export it to a YouTube video, and it'll be like, 30 seconds of your life over this weeks of like 5-second increments of combat that you've been sweating over, and you get to see how funny it is as you watch like as a whole platoon run forward and get slaughtered because you mistook where their rocket launcher guy was going to be looking or something. It was really, really fun for something that's like, you know, from a mechanic that's relatively straightforward.
Yeah, it's a perfect example, dude. I just linked that in the chat for everybody that's watching. Also, if you're watching, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe, please. And don't forget to join the giveaway. What's up, URI? You got some ideas?
On my end, I'm a way simpler person, so I've been playing regular chess asynchronously. The games tend to be way longer because the moves can kind of repeat themselves when you don't have the memory of what's actually going for the past week, and you've actually done the same 4 moves for 3 weeks in a row. When the games get a bit smaller. But on the more interesting end, AI Dungeon is a game that manages to keep its own state, and an AI basically runs dungeon mastering for your group. And I've tried to play that with 4 friends, where we only allow 1 message per person, but we do it asynchronously because not everybody has the same time to play together. So if we are all around, we sit together and play, but if we're not, then everybody plays by their order of turns, just logging in and trying to type what they want and letting the AI see what it does. And the games get way crazier when nobody's around. Just like people may either try re-rolling what they're doing until the AI gives a funny answer, or I don't know what's going on there, but it was pretty whack.
Yeah, you got me thinking about chess now. I was just thinking about, I've got a chessboard. Let me pop it up here real quick. I can't get this. I don't know how to turn this around on here. It's over there on the wall, though. Let's see. That was echoey. I'm gonna turn that off. Yeah. But yeah, that's oh man. I messed up my whole thing. You got me thinking about it and totally on there. Let me show Dave's thing real quick. Dave, you had a game you wanted to share, right?
Yeah, it's not on the actual subject of this, but Buddy's game just got released this week, and it's been blowing up across a load of YouTubers and in forums and all the rest. It's an indie game that's won loads of awards, and he's doing really, really well. And it's fantastic. Like, if you're a coder and you love puzzles, this is just going to freak you out, and you'll be on it for ages playing it. But Patrick's Parabox is an amazing game. It's like 350 odd levels of just, as you can see from the trailer, just weird little interactions where you have to move a box into a certain location by looking at how it interacts when you put it out of another box, or you go into a box, and different shapes that come from it. It is an ingenious game, and it's given me lots of fun this week, even though I've played the demos from him. But yeah, it got released this week, and it's been blowing up all over the place.
I've been watching the progress of this on the Unity 3D subreddit for quite a while. It's been every so often there's been a GIF of this, and it's been exciting watching the effects change for the scaling in and out.
He's been working on it for like the last few years that I've known him, and he's been dedicated to this, just perfecting every last bit of it, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
Maybe you can get him to hop on the show sometime and talk about it.
Yeah,
cool. If he's up for it, it'd be neat. I'm sure people would love to ask him questions and find out more about it. It looks really cool. I like the concept too. It's a neat puzzle.
Kind of makes me think of circling back about how Jason just said he saw it in the Unity 3D subreddit, and we talked earlier about how trying to advertise your game everywhere even before it's available is really important. Here you go.
Yeah, I mean, he had a demo on Steam that people could download for ages. He's been all over the place giving talks on it. He's been on subreddits and on forums posting about this thing to get people knowing about it. He's been to Indiecade to take this and won an award at Indiecade for this by showing it in their dev groups and all the rest. And he's been doing everything right on how to put a game out by a single developer, indie. But yeah, I'll give him a shout and see if he wants to come on sometime.
I think that would be cool. I want to pop through a couple of questions real quick. You guys are up for it? And then maybe we'll go back into the giveaway and start that in just a few minutes. So there was a question about a book that I have not read. Maybe you guys have. It says, I've heard great things about this book, Designing Games, A Guide to Engineering Experiences by Tynan Sylvester. And they're wondering if anybody's read it. I don't know if you guys have seen this book or read it. No. If anybody in chat has, let me know. Maybe I'll grab a copy and check it out. Sounds interesting, but I don't know about that one personally. And then let's see. I'm creating a game where you can place buildings on uneven ground. How would you resolve the problem of the mesh shape not aligning to the surface, like placing a wall on rocky, low poly mountains or something? So how do you guys deal with this? You want to place buildings on uneven terrain. Do you modify the terrain, change the terrain? Do you stick it through there? Do you change the mesh? What would you do to restrict it? What's the general thought?
Remember that method that you keep shouting ever since I told you about it?
Which one's
Sweet
that?
test.
Yes.
So, generally speaking, the simplest solution, if you want to keep the building facing up, which tends to be the case, unless you're placing down like small rocks or mushrooms or something that can grow sideways, generally speaking, what you'll do is you'll have the mesh, and it's going to have the portion that's supposed to be above ground, and it's going to have some sort of collision to it. And you'll just be pushing it down on the scene until it finally collides with the terrain. And a really simple method for that is the rigid body sweep test method. If your mesh has a rigid body at all, you can do that with simple colliders. There are other methods for it. But generally speaking, you'll be pushing it down until it hits the floor, and then you'll keep it there, like even if just one corner touches it. But the trick is you put another visual mesh below it that sinks into the floor, and that one does not have collisions. So, as you place it on the ground, if it's uneven, there is going to be a part that's keeping it in place that looks relatively natural, like a big brick or something that will sink into the floor. You'll never see it unless you really, really have to. And that tends to be the simplest solutions for upright buildings. The other one you can do is just raycast to the center and trying to
Grab
sink it
normal.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah. That tends to work better on things that can turn, but if they can't, you can still let the make the original building with some portion of the mesh sunk into the floor so that it always kind of tries to fit. You can even round off the edges so it looks like it kind of made sense even if a tiny bit of it is floating.
Yeah, I often have an extra section on the bottom of the book, and then I put a field in the actual component, the building component, that says how much it can actually sink as well, so that bit is just generally it hits, and then it looks at that and goes, like, how much should I sink, as long as it's within those parameters, and add crap around it as well to make it blend, as you're always saying.
Yeah, that's
Did you
really
have
part of
anything on that, Jason?
Well, it really depends on what, like, the funny thing is it's not a one size solution because it's down to the mechanic of the game you're making. Like, some people will literally, if you try to click on a surface, they will flatten the terrain and it'll just place it flat in the terrain. Like, it depends on what, if you're doing something which has to generate a nav mesh with it, it might just be simpler to go, no, we're just going to like flatten this terrain and then tie it to the nearest path, and then the pathing works, rather than trying to get paths to work around it. Other things, a very common one you'll see in a lot of games is they require you to first place placeable ground. And so that either means you place a platform and you can only place on the platform, or you flatten terrain, paint it a certain color, and then you can build on it. And that's a cheeky way of saying you must conform to these previous rules prior. And you can then set rules like you could only build roads or paths on certain slopes. So you're cheating by going 2 steps removed, right? Where you basically say, to build ground must be at this angle. And then once you build enough ground, you can then safely build all the buildings you like on it. Personally, I like solutions like that because it's very definitive. If you fall into the trap of trying to be too clever, you can end up with they may be reproducible results for you, but the worst thing you can do for a game is break the rule of expectation. If a person's going to place something down and they don't know if it's going to add extra blocks underneath it, or it's going to raise up higher, or it's going to flatten, depending on a set of very smart rules you have for yourself, you can confuse players. And so even if it's more tedious but it's consistent, that's usually a better preference. And quite frankly, I'd go the lazier solution that's easier for the user. It again depends on the game. Like, it really does depend on what project you're making.
If you do want to go the extra mile with what Jason just talked about, you can actually do all of the systems, but then let a single action of trying to place a tower at a bad spot do all of them for you. Place the even ground, flatten it, place whatever you need under, and then put the tower on top as one action. The goal in these games usually is convenience of trying to do what you're to do. You're just trying to place the tower. You don't need 5-step for it. But if you want to give the players the options and the predictability, then you can just let all the 5 steps happen as part of the one command that the player gives.
Just throw a big warning at the player saying uneven terrain, don't place here, and then just move on.
Yeah, just
or do
ground.
nothing. Use the normal. Let everything build at ridiculous angles. It's part of the game. You know?
There you go. He figured out.
And the final solution also, just not do any of that and let the building float, because some players like that for creative purposes. If you look at the Genshin Impact, it has teapots that players can hop into, which are realms, and they can place anything they want in there, and they can do really wacky things. And players just ended up making parkour levels and arcade gliding ones. And the game's developers actually seen how creative players get with trying to place buildings in ways that don't let the player stand, so they keep sliding and making giant like fun slides. And they just ended up adding collectible coins and reset gates and sprint stuff and air glide pathways. It's just like, hone in on that.
Yeah, that's definitely cool. I hadn't
It
thought
is
about
funny
that.
how watching people break those things. Like, one of the classic ones is, if you've got a game that's like a house building sim type thing, there's often rules like you can only build a roof on a certain number of height blocks or whatever. And so what you end up having to do is these archaic workarounds where you'd like build the required base levels, then the top level, then the thing you want, then delete the base levels so you could then place your own floor underneath it. And a lot of building games will allow you to do that, because if you understand the rules, you can just start like hacking past the requirements. Yeah.
One thing in Terraria that was really, really common for a long while is that you could stack teleporters, which are one of the only furnitures that are solid in the game. So you can stand on them, but you can't walk through them. And a lot of other furniture needs a solid ground to stand on. So players would put teleporters on top of teleporters. Then they'll put whatever they want on the teleporter and break the first teleporter, which breaks the second teleporter, but not the actual furniture, because we have some optimization in there to not do that. And you end up with floating furniture. And people really, really like that for some creative builds. And we're like, make sure you don't break it. Like, we know it's a bug, but we are deliberately trying to not break it if we can. And eventually we broke down and said, you know what, screw it, we're just adding invisible blocks. Because it got way too difficult to do it any other way.
Allow the players to do it. Makes sense. So I want to take this next question real quick, but first I just wanted to give everybody a kind of reminder to join the giveaway. If you want to win a 1-year license, just pick a race and class combo. Looks like we only have 3 cards and 1 beholder. So I don't know. Pick whatever you think will win. I have no idea what's going to win. I think I went with an assassin something. I forget. I don't know what you guys chose. But if you want to win, make sure that you enter now and hit the thumbs up button and subscribe and all that stuff. I'm going to minimize this window so we can get back to questions. And I wanted to know the answer to this question, so I'm hoping maybe one of you guys has an answer. Is there a plugin or a way to force Unity to highlight or change the color of the lock icon when you lock something in the inspector? Because just like me, they lock things and occasionally forget that they locked it, and they're wondering why their changes aren't working, why nothing's doing right, and the position's not changing or whatever. And this happens like when you lock the inspector tab. So you go in and I have a window right here, right? So you're in here, you hit pause, you hit lock on the inspector, and then you're clicking through and you're like, oh, why isn't it changing? I don't realize it though, because especially what happens to me is I'm using a game object and I lock it, and then I'm like clicking on another instance of that game object, and I don't realize that, oh, I'm still locked on the first one, the prefab or whatever I was looking at. So do you guys know of a plugin or a way to deal with that, to change the view
I
of
just use
something
2
that's locked?
inspectors. If I'm locking an inspector, I lock one, open the second one, and then when I'm done with the first one, I close it. So I don't usually have that problem.
I don't even lock the inspector. I just right-click on the object I wanted and say click from the context menu, which opens up a new inspector window focused only on that object and that object ever.
That's true. And that's a new one, right? That's a new thing that's been added. Let me pop that up and show everybody.
Depends
I
on what
don't
you call
remember what.
new. I think it's been around for over a year now.
Yeah, it's still relatively new. So here's the properties one. The pop-up doesn't really show well until I click on it. When I clicked on it, you kind of see it for a second. But it pops up this properties window, which is essentially a locked inspector tab, right? So this might be a better solution. In fact, I forgot about this. So I totally forgot that it exists. I've seen it multiple times, and I think that's probably the best solution.
One thing you can do with it is you can actually dock it still, and it's still going to stay only on that object. So really convenient. It even shows the name of the object at the top instead of just like inspector or something.
I've got it up right here. It still stays right here. Looks nice. So yeah, just right click on it and hit properties. So there was another question. There were 2 questions about referencing things, and I kind of want to take both of these at the same time. One is they're struggling with a lot of things like singletons, holding references, and serializable code. And then there was another one about what's the best way to hook up both sides of a manager with events or other things. And there was a third question that I missed in there, basically talking about using scriptable objects to reference things. I was just curious, if maybe we can talk really briefly about how to kind of cross scene reference things. So you've got objects, and I think that in scene and scene to prefab referencing is relatively simple. But what about cross scene reference stuff? Is there something that you guys recommend for that? So say you've got like a manager in one scene and some other object in another scene that's getting spawned or that manager needs to deal with. How do you guys go about setting up these references? And do they apply to your single scene setups?
So I have a rant here. If anybody wants to take this first, go ahead.
No, I expect everybody has a rant. You might as well get yours done first.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Understandable. So generally speaking, something that I see a lot of people failing to kind of address when they begin this discussion is that scenes are assets. And you're basically asking, how do you tie something between two assets? Which, generally speaking, the solution is a third asset. So scriptable objects are the natural progression of how I do these. Now, if you don't want scriptable objects, you're going to end up saying, yeah, I need two assets pointing to each other without a direct reference to something else. So they end up getting quite dirty, and I kind of hate it. So you can use weak references, like say, I need thing free, and the other thing also needs is thing free. Therefore, if some manager stores free on both ends, then you have what you need. But generally speaking, just scriptable objects, be done with it. It's clean, it's useful. You can save a lot of data within it and then just point to that data.
And to do that, it can be as simple as just both things reference some scriptable object that's in your project, right? And then pass the messages through that, or even just pass the references to each other through that.
Yeah, I mean, in runtime code and assets are two different things. And when you're working with assets, it's really just I tend to keep my scriptable objects just data containers, so the systems are all runtime and saying, hey, this key is supposed to unlock that door, and the player unlocked this key, so their inventory has a reference to that asset, and that asset says, yeah, I'm key free, and when you approach the door in the other scene, it says, yeah, I need key free, and there you go. It's just you're asking if there's a reference to an asset in a collection, which is really, really simple code-wise. And also just making those assets. You don't even need anything special. You just need to make a class extending scriptable objects and the right-click context menu to create a new one. It's like, we're talking an empty class. It can't get simpler than that.
Yeah, I want to see the Gagaya demo that's coming out, because they've got. I want to see what their system looks like. I assume it's exactly like that, which is very, very similar, because they've got some anchor setup that they did, because they do a lot of scenes. Like when I looked at that project, I think it's like 30 scenes or something. It was some insane thing. So they're using some scriptable object anchors to deal with that, and I assume just get references to the transforms and the rigid bodies and the things that they need for the different systems. And theirs was split out like by subsystems for artists and designers and stuff. So like, I think animation and art, all the different art layers or different stuff. I don't even know all of the different ones they had. They had a lot of scenes. I remember seeing it. So I think that'll be interesting to check out. You guys have any other ideas on that, or should we just jump on to one of the million other questions?
This was going to be a video I was going to make at one stage. I may even do it. It's a lecture I want to give, because I think I want to rewind all the way back. This has nothing to do with scenes or anything else. This is the concept of references. So there's a little bit of foundational on this one. If you've got two things and you want thing A to talk to thing B, you need a reference to it. Simple as. There's no way to get around that. If you want to phone somebody, you need their phone number. You need a way to contact that other person. In the case of making games, if something is global and needs to be importantly accessed, like if you're calling an ambulance or the police, that might be a global number. It might be a number that you don't need to go and acquire a reference for. If it's your landlord or your neighbors or whoever you might need to call about something important, you might need to go and acquire a specific reference to that yourself. And then someone has to store that. And so in a world where there's no events and no other solutions, that's where the original observer pattern is. The observer pattern is something says, I have information. That might just be somebody saying, I'll receive deliveries of new products at some stage, and I'll let you know. If you give me your phone number, I will call you and tell you when new things have arrived. And that's all that an observer was. It was basically, this thing is interesting to you, so you subscribe to it, and it will update you later. The problem with this, though, is you need to know what you're subscribing to. You need to go to your local shop, give them the number, and then they will call you when something comes up. But in some cases, you want to know about new things. Maybe there's new events in your town, and you don't have to go to every single place that might have an event. You might want to go to some hub and ask them, and they will let you know if anything interesting happens. And that's where you get what's called the pub sub model. And that basically means, look, I'm a business, and I want to tell people that I've got an event on, or I'm a person and I want to attend events, but we don't need to know about each other. I don't need to know every single person that ever might want to attend an event. So you create something in the middle, and that something in the middle is basically like an event bus or something. And that's where you can subscribe to that, and then it will publish. And so now you've got this nice thing in the middle. The most classic example of this would be a chat room. A chat room is a room where you all agree to join a room. The room sends events out, and each person in the room can send messages to the room, and the room sends it to the other people. And if you send it to the room and you mark it as private or with a person's name, you have sent it to the room, but the room will then only send it to the person that's indicated by what you marked. So all of this is to say, the kind of the chain has gone from you need to either talk to something globally. That's got its pros and cons, and that's where you get to singletons and whatever. Then you talk to something directly, and that's if your relationship is very close. That's if you're talking about two things which are intrinsically tied and there's no reason to have external events. Then there's crossing an application boundary. That means this stuff over here doesn't need to know about this stuff over here. You need some way to cross that boundary. And so an event is a good way to do that, because it means that you can fire off an event and not be constantly aware. And the third option is a bunch of stuff goes into one global location. That global location fires out. And so the truth is, there's not like this is the right answer. There is a whole series of solutions that all solve different purposes and different problems. And this is why we keep harping back on the concept of understanding. You just have to try them out, see what they do, and apply them in the situations that matter. I would say, as a general rule, the further apart things are, the more of a wider net you cast. If two things are very close, there's no need to use a big event system. If two things are very far away, it makes sense to have a big event system. And so, to go all the way back to what Uri was saying, that intermediary pub-sub model can be a singleton. And the beauty of making the singleton is a singleton survives across scenes. So that is that version of that model, but adding the benefit of living past the process of crossing scene.
And you don't even need a singleton. You can just have anything at runtime. If two scenes are loaded and it stays, it keeps its memory, or you even serialize the references to the things that it's supposed to save. You still get to keep everything that you needed. In scene 1, get key. In scene 2, load inventory with key, reference to key, open lock off key.
One last note on that, because something that gets very interesting is we think about events from services, but there's also events from data. And I don't want to get into the entire pipeline between the differences between models and view models and all that. But a very common thing you'll come across is the reason you want an event in the first place is something's changed. And you want to update something because something else has changed. And so what you can do is you traditionally don't want to put events on your data. Data is basically very clean. The beauty of data is data should be transmittable in multiple formats. And that's why, again, I often complain about people talking about specifically JSON or XML. A piece of data I should be able to represent in 50 different methods of textual representation, and all of them should be interchanged. If an event is part of your data, you can't replicate that in JSON or XML because you can't replicate an event in the same way. So try to keep your data clean, but there's a layer above that where you have your models, your data models, and your view model. And a view model is the data as represented in your UI. So that might be an ID represents the kind of icon and the kind of information about this weapon. The view model for that icon might be a sprite in Unity. And that sprite may change. The data hasn't changed, but the visual representation might change. And if that kind of thing does, you want to fire events. And so this is what we're talking about, is that you can have this concept of a observer where that object fires an event. And something to look into is what I actually do. I bring it all the way back around because to answer the question about using scriptable objects, I use something called iNotify property changed handlers. And it's a very fancy way of saying this is .NET's answer to this problem, which is you put a notify property change handler on an object, and to go back, you basically say, these things can change. I can assign a value to this, and it will broadcast this object has changed the connection string or the username or whatever. And that way you can subscribe to that model, and everything else will dynamically update as long as that model changes. So there are some patterns and solutions to this, but they all stream right the way back to the basic concept of the observer pattern, which is what, by the way, events are in .NET. The actions, the events that you're using, they're the observer pattern. They're not different. They are literally the native implementation of that pattern. And then you get into kind of more complex stuff there. So if you're interested in that, just look into the notify property changed stuff. You want to go past that, you look at Fody weavers, which can automatically notify property changer models. That gets into crazy territory at that stage.
Those are a bit harder to get working in Unity, though. At least in my experience. At least back when I tried to do it, getting Fody to weave stuff in there.
I haven't.
Were you able to get
I
it
don't do it.
working?
I've never even tried to do Fody weaving because, to be honest, with live templates in Rider, I can automate like 3/4 of it without the mess of having a third-party dependency whose sole job is to weave the notification.
I've used it for web stuff, and it came in super handy in the past. But when I
great
tried
for
to pull
APIs
it into
too, yeah.
Unity, it came into too many problems with the compilation steps. But then again, that was prior to the whole compiler upgrade. So when they switched to Roslyn, so it's probably quite a bit different now. All right, I've got the giveaway going. I'm going to start it in like 2 minutes. I'm going to give everybody a last second to kind of hop in. If you want to enter to win a copy of Rider, it's a 1-year license. All you have to do is choose a racing class or race or class. Example, pick a rat wizard. I am now a werewolf assassin. Although I might change to be a werewolf bard because we don't have very many bards. So I'm just going to type bard into chat and switch. Also, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe and all that stuff. Once you're in, we'll kick that off in like 2 minutes. There are a couple more questions in here, but before I start popping them up and just picking, I wanted to see if you guys had any questions or topics that you want me to pull forward instead of me just picking the ones that I marked as starred. You guys have anything? Yeah.
David, can you do your entire rant in 2 minutes?
Oh yeah, sorry, I kind of ate that time slot, didn't I? My apologies.
That's fine. That's fine.
All right, at the end of Dave's rant,
sure.
we're hitting play, and the battle begins. So join quick.
So I want everybody to find Jason Story's Discord and go on there and bug him about making a video on this. So when this comes up in future videos, in future discussions, we could just point at that video and get you to go watch it. So yeah. And then everybody subscribe to Jason's Story, so when that comes out, you can watch it. And then he can give a 40-minute explanation of what he just explained in 10. That's it. That's all I'm going to say.
Your channel, by the way, Jason, your subscriber growth is great. I love seeing that you got like 9 or 10,000 subscribers off of 8 videos now. It's
yeah,
very, very well done. I gotta say, I love it. There was a super chat that came in. I just wanted to pop it up. Thank you. And they said they took a treat from their ML studies to join the GameDev stream, watching it and love it. Thank you for super chatting and joining us live. I love having people out here, and it's awesome. And the super chat's cool too. All right, let's start off the giveaway. You guys ready? We got 113 people. Should we wait for one more to get it up to an even number, so we don't have one person sitting on the sidelines at the end? Oh, is anybody going to join? I'm going to wait until that number pops over to 114. I see somebody just typed in chat. Oh, a couple people did. I'm going to hit the button and we'll see how it ends up, because I'm never going to be able to time it to an even one if I just there. All right, battle is beginning. So we'll let that run, and then whoever wins, just you will email me at the end. We'll talk about it as the winner comes up. So you guys want to jump on to some more questions?
Also, I just want to say that there's a lot of color variety in today's battle.
Oh,
for the classes.
Paladin is always the top one, though. I feel like Paladins.
Yeah, people like having HP, especially after Elden Ring.
I really want to get some abilities in here and stuff, and just do some more fun things in here. I like the idea of stackable classes, though. I think that would be a fun YouTube video. So maybe I'll record a video on how to add stackable classes, and then we'll do that for next week. People will be able to stack up and choose in multi-class, so single class or multi. I think I like the idea of combining the stats, but like scaling them down a little bit if you multi-class, so there's some reason to choose one versus a two, but not a lot. I don't know.
Here's a question for you then, Jason. How are you going to get people to be able to swap class in the YouTube chat?
It'd just be the two most recent classes they chose, I guess.
Okay.
Right. Or maybe we just make it more strict. Like I want to be a wizard assassin, a whiz assassin. You have to type it out. I don't know. Make a YouTube video out of it. I'm trying to make lots and lots of YouTube videos now. Try to figure out what's going to be cool and popular. That Rider one was super popular, but again, I think it's mostly thumbnails. I'm convinced now that YouTube is almost all thumbnails and in the first 10 seconds of the video. That's all that matters. I'm wrong, but yeah.
Wait, you're saying I shouldn't spend weeks like going really meticulously over scripts?
No, well, I wouldn't say that because your videos show a difference, right? But yeah, for me, like a lot of the time, it's just come up with an idea, record it real quick, and make sure to just remember to spend at least 10 minutes on the thumbnail. Don't spend 2 minutes on it.
It's funny. It's funny you say that because the video that took me the least amount of time to edit was the one that I spent the most amount of time on the thumbnail. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The last thumbnail I made was one that I actually had a lot of fun with. I was just playing with all the various effects and sliders in Photoshop, and so that was good fun.
Oh, I switched to a thumbnail blaster recently, which super handy. A friend recommended it. It was like a one-time fee. I think it was like $60, and it's so much better than the alternative of me trying to do it with all these other old tools. So it just works and it's simple.
I just use Photoshop. I literally just open a blank canvas, grab some photos, put some strokes and glows on things, and write some text. Job done.
So, with the thumbnail blaster, I hit refresh, I click on the video, and I hit next, and then I pick a template, and then it fills in the text based off of my YouTube title already. It does a lot, and I'm very unartistic, so it gives me the templates and stuff, and that's really what I need it for, is the starting points.
There's literally Skillshare courses on making thumbnails. There you go. There's something you could look into.
I don't have the time to learn any new skill.
I made 3 templates with just some text on it in Photoshop, and literally I just go in and rewrite the text on it and then pump it out depending on what the thing is. And that's it. That's why I get no views. Yeah.
I'm telling you, go to get a thumbnail blaster and take the one. I think on this one, I took the crazy eyed girl thumbnail as the default one for our show episode. Like, I'm telling you, like they have good. It's really just about like the fonts and the color selection is what I like for, and then just swapping in the images. In fact, in my last one, I actually had my sword right here. I don't know if you guys saw the thumbnail. I just took it. I replaced some random girl that was there with me holding the sword. It was perfect. Made a good thumbnail. So they had to simplify and save time. I definitely don't have time to get good at being artistic. I spent forever not being good at it, and I don't think that's going to change. What's up, Yari?
The real trick here is the end game is to just invade Jason Story's room and just yoink his all his effort into a single PNG.
I'm going to copy his thumbnails next.
I live in his walls.
And the funny Jason, thing is, he's using the same lights and camera as me as well, you know? So
just keep swapping the color of the lights behind you just to throw him off.
Yeah. I should set that in some automatic circling.
Yeah.
And he's going to record it.
Somebody made a comment earlier that it looked like, because of how close he is to the actual shelving, it actually looked like your eyes behind Jason recording. So they're in the same room, but Jason's just in front of him and they're using a different camera. I like that. Yeah.
And it looks like I have 2 of my cool masks as well, which I quite like. You know?
I have 2 mics here.
Oh, man. I love it.
You got an empty shelf behind you, Uri. You got to go and fill that in with something.
Oh, yeah. Gotta put something back there. Totally empty.
Nice. Yeah.
Empty space. That's like this empty space on my wall where I want to get the sword. By the way, Dave, got to talk to you about this.
No.
Think we can print a sword holder that would mount on the wall?
Yeah.
I thought that might be a good idea. Maybe I'd talk to you about. I'll do some research and look, unless you happen to know of some cool sword printing 3D stuff for holding swords on the wall.
Just measure.
I don't know. It seems like, Dave, you're like, oh yeah, I've got 3 sword mounts right here. I just printed up yesterday.
I don't have any swords. I'm not a sword collector. I'm not one of those people. But I'm going to ostracize myself from tons of people. I don't collect swords.
Now the sword
I collect motion simulators.
What people, Dave?
Yeah, those people. You know the people I'm talking about. People like you, big beards.
People that are going to show up with a sword.
Yeah, it's turn up with swords.
Just be careful of Jacob's gun with that sword motif.
Just bring the one round that you want to do, and we'll measure it, and then we'll 3D print it.
That sounds like a plan. I've got it right there. I'm trying to figure it out. So we'll have to do that. Gotta love technology, right? There was a question. I think I'll just take this one if you guys don't mind. It said they're struggling with quantifying their development contributions on a team, and they want to know what's a reasonable expectation for daily progress? So you're on a team, you're working with other developers. How much do you expect to get done in, let's call this like a normal day, not like a terrible day where everything goes wrong or a great day where it's like the perfect one, but like an average day. What do you guys expect? How much work do you kind of expect to get done? How do you kind of quantify that, or is there a way that you can?
542 lines a day.
542, not 512. You're keeping it off of
So you've
our
got to do
base.
a contribution. No, 542.
542.
To be a bit more
I was waiting for somebody to
reasonable.
write that down. All right, I've got my code number.
I love it if they went to their boss the next week and he went, I don't feel like you're actually contributing enough. And he went, 542 every single day. You go home early some days. I've done my 542.
Delete
If you
some
want an
extra
easy
lines.
win there, just copy and paste the class with different tabbing,
don't cheat.
and then you get your contribution.
Hey, if you press the right slash 3 times, it'll put in like 4 lines of comments for you. There you go.
Depends if you have parameters or not. Add more parameters, you'll get more down.
This is why you like comments.
By the way,
in your
do
code,
not
huh, Dave?
look at this as a serious metric.
No, don't look at serious metric. It's 445. I'm just here for comedy relief. No, 542. You can include brackets, but it doesn't include white space. So blank lines do not count. They have to have something on them. Comments do count in the 542, but blank lines don't. And your copyright notice also counts in the 542.
You're so serious
But
about
if you're
this
ridiculous, where you put a copyright notice of like 10 lines, you have to restrict that to about 3 at most, maybe 4 if you're going to put a date line underneath it. But that contributes to the 542.
Just remember that Stack Overflow links get you all the code that's in the Stack Overflow.
It's automatic. Yeah,
Yeah,
my
if
general
it's
rule
included, you've done your
is
part.
slightly different. And it's less, I would say, the amount of code that you write in a day is almost never a good indicator, right?
No,
like
it's
more
a terrible
code
indicator.
is often a bad thing. A lot of times people write extra code. They write a lot of code thinking that writing code is the good thing, and it's the number of problems that you solve. So I look at it more as like the number of, if you guys have a ticketing system full of bugs and you're working on bugs, how many bugs was they able to knock out today? Was it 10 or 20, or how many new features or progress?
No,
it
not all
depends,
tickets
because
are
if it's
made
a
equal.
really big bug, like that could take a long time.
Oh, sure. I'm just thinking an average day, though. Like a lot of these are some of the things I look at, like essentially how much progress did I make forward? Like how much did I accomplish? And it could be knocking out a lot of little things or one big thing that is actually making progress. But for me, it's all about like having something at the end of the day where I've, I guess, progressed and pushed things forward and not gotten stuck. I don't know.
So
I don't know how to, I guess, weigh that. Go ahead. I'm going to shut up now.
The reason you're getting so many very hard to deal with answers here from that kind of a question is because that's not a programming question. That is a project management question. And the worst people in the world to manage projects are programmers. They have absolutely no concept of time, how long things take to do, and the stuff they're supposed to do, they'll often not do instead of the stuff that's more fun. And they'll put off the stuff that needs doing for the business because they're not as fun to code. So the truth of the matter is, until you find yourself in a position where you're managing other programmers, it's often very hard to reason about these kinds of questions and turn them into clinical answers, because there's a huge war between the people who are paying the bills, who are asking, I need numbers. How long will this take? How much will this cost me? And the developer's going, it'll be done when it's done. I have to do it. I can't tell you how long it'll take. If I could tell you how long it would be done, I would have automated it and you would have it immediately. There wouldn't be a question because I would have done it already. So the truth is the answer lies somewhere in the middle, and you have to have a bit of give and take. And so the way you solve this is you don't put direct numbers on things. You can't say 5 bugs or 10 issues or 3 features or 512 lines of code. You can't give numbers like that.
542.
Sorry, 42. So yeah, you can't give those numbers. So what you can do instead is it comes from sort of an agile and Scrum approach. We used to use the term t-shirt sizes, and it literally means arbitrary number. It doesn't matter what the number is, but people intuitively understand 1 and 10. 10 is a bigger number. 10 is 10 times more difficult than a 1. 5 is halfway between the two. But they're not attributed to hours or minutes or days or work units. They are telling you this is difficult by this scale relative to something else. So on a rough estimate, I should be able to fix 10 level 1s in the time it takes me to fix 110 or something to that effect. And so what you do is you have a bunch of programmers sit around and you ask, how long will it take to do these features? And you weigh their costs. Now, that's not going to get you a right answer because different people will tell you it'll take different lengths of time. If I'm good at a certain thing, it'll be a 2 for me. If someone's bad at a certain thing, it'll be a 5 for them. So what you do is you get your development team to basically bid for it. And you go, how long would that take? I think it's a 5. I think it's a 3. And there's a thing called planning poker, where you don't give each other the numbers of what you're picking. You hide your numbers, you pick how difficult a task would be, and you show it all at once, or you all announce it. And then whoever gave the highest number, you would say, why is that? What do you think that makes this a difficult task? And that might bring to light something you hadn't thought of. And someone else would say it's very easy because I've done this before. It's like, oh, so you have knowledge, we don't, about this issue. Then as a group, you assign the person best fit to do the task and you move on. So the answer is, it's not an arbitrary how much units you should do. It's roughly per task, there's a certain amount of things need doing. And those things can be attributed to how much t-shirt sizes or units of work people can do in a day or in a week or in a month. And then you can kind of balance that between you. A good project manager will negotiate with the development side, and they will say, right, how many units could we say? Let's give ourselves 20. We can do 20 this week, 20 arbitrary units. Go and make your bids, figure out how much stuff will be. And then you go to the bosses and go, here are the 10 features that we could add. We could add the double jumps. We could add the fireballs. Fireballs will be a 2. Double jump might be a 3. Whatever else could be a 10. And you can have 20, but only 20. And if you pick 19, you don't get to roll over one. But if we do less, we might be able to add an extra one later. But you just pick to fill up to that amount, and we'll try our best to get those done in that time. We're not promising, but at least that gets us closer to an agreement of how much work can be done in that amount of time. So if it's you saying how much work should I do to contribute to a team, that's kind of nonsense, because at the end of the day, people siloing and doing their own individual versions on a team, you're going to be far less efficient because certain other people are going to be better at certain tasks. So the answer should be, as a team, how much do you get done? It doesn't really matter how much you personally on a team get things done. It's how much further along did the project get as a result.
And if you are talking, though, go ahead.
I would say I'd add to that because, I mean, if you're looking for self-worth in this sort of thing, speak to your teammates, speak to the tech producer. I used to be a tech producer at Sony and used to do the thing that Joseph's story is talking about. We actually had cards from 0 to 10. Well, actually, it's 1 to 10. And everybody would get a pack of these cards. And whenever we would do a task, people would put the card out and then we'd all show the cards and we'd talk through them and select from there. And that's how we would assign the tasks out and build the budget. And it was, 20, 30, whatever the budget was for that particular thing. We used to do 2-week sprints. But if you're worried about your self-worth on a team and you don't feel like you're contributing enough, go and speak to your tech producer. Ask them, how's it going? What am I doing? How am I moving along these tasks? If you're struggling to get your tasks done each week and that's what you're worried about and all the rest of it, talk with your teammates about that and work that stuff out. Your contribution to the team. What's your contribution to yourself? Are you feeling good about yourself when you get home at the end of the day? If you're worried about that, then speak to somebody about it and get it sorted.
If you do want reasonable metrics and you're having difficulty gauging it, something I can say from experience is with Terraria, we are generally a smaller team. We didn't ever have more than 3 full-time programmers working on the code at any given point in time. So every contribution or lack of contribution to, say, the version control shows. If I'm on a big task and I can't deliver any code for a full day, it might feel pretty bad, but it doesn't mean I didn't do anything. And something that is pretty difficult to do at the beginning, but you get better at over time, is splitting a big goal into smaller deliverable goals. And as you do those, you get to feel your worth, because instead of saying, I have a big task that's going to take 2 weeks, you can split it off into smaller tasks and you can do a single one of them every day. And that might end up feeling a bit better. It's still the same work, but you have deliverable metrics that you can look at and say, I finished this subtask, I finished this subtask. And once all the subtasks are done, maybe something new shows up on the way, or you're done and you get to say, I did all these things, instead of, I finished 1 ticket on Jira, which doesn't feel as nice.
Yeah, and then you might find yourself in a situation where you don't know the answer to something. And the answer is, I don't know. I have to look into it. You don't have to find yourself in a position where you could say nothing. There's a name for that. It's called a spike task. And a spike task it's like a railroad spike. You basically say, I have to go research this. I don't know the answer. So what you do is, rather than panicking and having nothing to do, you mark how difficult you think it will be to research the right answer. And then you go on that task to find the answer. And if the answer is, we can't do it, that's still a successful task. You did a thing, you had a goal, you completed it. So like we said earlier, a project is basically something that needs to be done that has tasks you can do on it. Well, finding out if this task is doable is a perfectly valid task. So don't freeze up just because you can't get a thing done. Make the act of finding out and learning it part of a thing that can be done, because then you're now more useful because you can now do the thing next time.
Also, just to prove that point, almost every single update in the past 2 years, I've explicitly gone and told the CEO, "Hey, I have a thing. I have a thing that I can think add value here. Can I take a day or two to experiment and show you what I'm doing?" And when I'm giving approval, I'm trying it out, and it ends up being pretty nice for these kinds of things. Figuring out if you can deliver something or not is a value in itself.
Well, we're down to the final 4 in our giveaway. So I have to let these 2 or these 4 fight them out. We get 2 paladins, a necro, and an assassin, and none of us made it. So I don't know who's going to win. Yeah, I see Luke. Oh, shit, getting excited in chat. So we'll see if Luke won again. Maybe you'll be the winner here. We'll see. We got it's a necromancer.
Demons and necromancers, always a pair.
Versus a crab assassin. I guess we'll see which one's the
Elden
winner
Ring
for
all over again.
fighter license. Oh, that was a big hit right from the start. Oh, I heard an amazingly bad necromancer joke. Oh, I just ruined it. That was no good.
Congratulations.
Well, congrats, Alan. Alex,
Bad luck.
send me an email and I will send you your rider code. Just send it over to Jason at game.courses and I'll send you your code. Hopefully later today. What was the? Yeah, I'll save my my joke for next week when I haven't already spoiled the answer. I'm not good at this. I've been practicing telling jokes to toddlers, and it's not working out very well. So there was one last question I just wanted to pop up real quick before we start wrapping things up, because I thought it was kind of an interesting one. So as someone who enjoys programming but finds balancing and designing games so boring, would you recommend paying someone to do that for you, or do you think it's better to learn to enjoy it? And I thought this one was interesting because I think that as a programmer who's in that situation, you should probably just find a designer to pay you instead to do the programming part. Because if you don't want to do the design stuff,
I've seen the kind of projects Nate here works on, and so now you've got as a new challenge for yourself is learn AI and make yourself adversarial AI that will basically constantly compete against each other until you get averaged out numbers that are equally balanced. So there you go. New project.
Machine
learning. Figure it yourself.
On a more practical sense, when you're trying to design things, the way you end up putting the numbers in will drastically affect how the game plays out. So if your true passion is just programming and not designing a game, you can make all the systems you want. Just find someone else to deal with that for you. If you don't, then do look into how to carefully consider these things, because the difference between The Division and Call of Duty, well, aside from the first and third person perspective, is how much damage each bullet does in the end of the day. So what I'm trying to say here is you can get drastically different games if you don't put the work into balancing. You can get a feeling you didn't expect to get, you didn't want to get when you're developing a game that you need to balance. So finding a designer for this is good if you're not willing to put in the time. Otherwise, try to figure out automated solutions or approximated values that just get you always the result you kind of want. One thing that the Nier Automata designer did was that he wanted to replicate the feeling of Ocarina of Time. So he measured in minutes how long it takes to get from city A to city B. And he literally made the movement speed match that and the distance, so that when the player runs around, it will take them the same amount of time as Ocarina of Time to get from city A to city B in Nier Automata.
And here's a kind of a small aside on that, just because it's kind of interesting from a game design perspective. If it's multiplayer, it needs to be balanced. That's required. But if it's a single player game, ask yourself if balancing matters. Sometimes, depending on the kind of game you're going for, obviously you can tweak it so that you give a certain kind of experience. Game flow is technically the most important part. And from your game's perspective, flow is usually achieved by a good balance, but it might not be. Some games are power fantasies. Other games are about being beaten all the time and learning the boss's patterns, like a very recent game that everyone's talking about. So balance doesn't necessarily mean equal balanced, right? It can just be down to the experience of what you're going for. So I would focus more on the game flow. What are you actually trying to achieve rather than like exact numeric accuracy, you know?
All right. Well, I think we'd probably wrap it up and send everybody over to Dave's video now. I just linked it in chat. You want to tell everybody what that video is about, Dave?
Yeah, sure. Let me look up what it is.
It's about game development.
Yeah, game development. No, yeah, building something nice. It's about writing
Pure
545 lines of code a day, and it was 5. Everybody got that wrong because everybody started quoting
Pretty
542, but I said that was the joke. 545 was the actual number, but nobody paid attention. Nobody ever does.
I missed it.
I'm okay. I'm comedy relief. So the video today is called Unity Validation Tips, and it's just about the onValidate function, highlighting things in the hierarchy and highlighting things in the inspector for validation things like I've just dropped something out. Stuff we were talking about earlier. I show an example of how to do that, just some base stuff that people can build off of. It's not my validation system. It hasn't got all the bells and whistles you saw earlier. It's just got some nice starting points and some entries into things like the editor application class, the editor utility class, property attribute class, and the property drawer classes. So it just gives you an idea of what they do and shows you an example of how they work so that you can take that and build that into your own stuff. Write out groups in hierarchies and stuff like that. You'll learn the basis of how to do that sort of thing with this. So yeah.
And if you didn't yet, go watch his video on attributes too, because it's fantastic.
Which one was that?
And make sure that you are subscribed
one.
like that.
Property attributes, yeah. Oh, you like that one, did you? Oh, good.
It's nice, cool robot. All right, I'll drop the link for that in chat again, so everybody can go check that out. Hit thumbs up and watch the video. Go learn about on the validation stuff, and then I get in trouble if I don't at least mention this once. Make sure that if you're interested in the GameDev Guild conference, check out the link down below in the description. There's more info coming today. There's some more updates today, and then I'm going to be doing some more stuff today as we finalize more speakers and bonuses and other cool stuff. I'm going to stop screen sharing now and see. Anybody have any other last final things before we say goodbye?
I should probably say if anyone happens to be going to PAX East, I will be there, so I can see you there if you're attending.
When is that?
That is end of this month, actually, 25th, 26th. The dates are somewhere. They're there. They're there. Yeah, it should be fun. There's as I think we've talked before about a friend of mine on my latest video. I showed his game. He's basically going to be showing that off at PAX, and I said I'd help out at the stand. So that'll be fun.
Oh, awesome. Maybe I doubt I'll get to attend that, but it would be fun. I definitely want to go back to GDC though. That was fun.
I might go next year. I wasn't around for this one, but maybe next year we can catch up with that.
No E3 this year.
Be more open.
Yeah, E3 is dead.
E3 is dead this year. So
that's a shame.
We won't meet up this year.
That's rough. GDC was really cool, so it'd be nice if we can at least do that again. So I linked the PAX one down below too, or in chat, so everybody can jump in and come meet Jason there. Go by the stand. What's the name of the game? It was the Paradox. No, that was
no. It's the I'm blanking now.
The Mars one.
Hostile Mars. Yeah. It's the one. It's the ECS game with like tons and tons of units, which is really cool.
Oh yes. Let's pull that one. I know exactly which one you're talking about. Pull it up real quick and just show it.
Yeah, that's Hostile Mars right there. Very hostile.
Yeah,
not
that
letting
one,
you
right?
reach.
That cannot be reached. That's what happens when you paste a link in the middle of another link. I'll drop the link down here too, so everybody can wish. How do I not have it listed? Oh, I'm not.
Yeah,
logged
so
in.
if you want, you can try that there. We'll be manning the booth and showing off all the cool features and building various contraptions to kill bots. So.
Yep. Wishlist
cool.
that. Everybody wishlist that, and then go buy Patrick's Power Box, and then buy this when it comes out. There you go. Support
Yes,
your
if
indies.
you haven't already, definitely do it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again. Yorai, did you have any final words?
Not that I can think
Okay.
of now.
All right. Well, then I will stop saying goodbye to everybody, and I guess we'll just say bye and hit the button. All right. Thanks, everybody. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share the stream. Check out all the links and stuff down below, and we will see you again next week.
Have a fantastic eve.
I am Iron Man.